Hey guys, tonight we're heading up, way up, past the clouds, past the mountaintops, into the eternal glitz and dysfunctional group chat of the ancient gods. Welcome to Mount Olympus. You've heard the names Zeus, Hera, Athena, but tonight we're peeling back the curtain on the real personalities behind those marble statues. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Not because you'll be smited by lightning, though. That's also on the table. But because these gods are chaotic emotionality, brilliant, violent, and wildly entertaining. In other words, everything except serene. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'm curious, what city are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I'll dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The top, literally. Mount Olympus isn't just a mountain. It's an eternal VIP lounge floating above the world where only the gods with proper divine clout get to live. Think Golden Palace's fragrant ambrosia feasts and enough ego to fill 1,000 Trojan horses. Time moves differently here. No one ages, no one sleeps, and no one ever runs out of wine. The air smells like blooming myrtle and cooked honey, and the halls are echoing with the sound of ongoing bickering in multiple languages, including thunder. The 12 Olympians, give or take, depending on who's counting, share this mythological penthouse. Basically the first reality TV ensemble cast. The vibe, imagine the real world divine edition. Power dynamics shift constantly. Alliances form and break. And yes, someone's always making someone else cry, though crying on Olympus is mostly reserved for mortals or herus when someone breaks his latest invention. Let's talk logistics. Olympus, according to the ancient poets, is high above the clouds, but still somehow anchored to the real Mount Olympus in Greece. It's always sunny except when Zeus is in a mood, and nobody ever needs to clean anything because, well, divine magic. The gods have personal chambers, throne rooms, balconies for dramatic monologues, and even gardens that change seasons on a whim. It's like if Versailles had an infinity scroll of elemental upgrades. Now, despite all this splendor, Olympus is not exactly a place of peace. Every god brings baggage. There are exes everywhere. Rivalries go back millennia. Everyone kind of hates Ares, but they're too scared of him to say it out loud. Think of it like a celestial high school reunion that never ends. At the center of it all, Zeus, king of the gods, wielder of thunder, serial data of everyone, and possibly the least emotionally intelligent being ever to hold. Absolute cosmic power. But we'll get to his mess in the next section. For now, let's focus on the group as a whole, how they function together, or more accurately, how they manage, not toxplode into 1,000 star fragments every time they share a meal. They do have meetings. Imagine a divine conference room with floating thrones, endless goblets, and at least one god sleeping through the whole thing, looking at you, Dionysus. When decisions must be made, wars launched, mortals blessed or punished, some poor soul turned into a cow. It usually involves dramatic debates, flaring tempers, and one of the muses awkwardly trying to take minutes. These meetings are less about collaboration and more about who can out-grandstand everyone else. And yet, as messy as they are, the gods are bound by something deeper than vanity. Immortality. Time doesn't erase grudges, it just gives them more flavor. Ancient insults linger like perfumes in the hallways. Old love affairs get rehashed centuries later over nectar. The past is never really past, it's just waiting for the next scandal. Fun side note, not all the gods on Olympus are part of the Big 12. Hades, for instance, opts out. He's down in the underworld running the show there. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, also quietly steps aside later on, making room for Dionysus, because apparently Olympus needed more chaos and fewer warm hugs. There's no formal nature department, so these shifts just sort of happen. Here's a quirky fact: the Greek gods didn't even create the world. That honor goes to primordial forces like Chaos, Gyre, and Uranus. Yes, insert your obligatory snicker here. The Olympians are more like divine influencers who took over once the real heavy lifting was done. They arrived late to the cosmic party and immediately started fighting over who gets the biggest slice of reality pie. And let's not forget the ever-awkward blend of incest power struggles and metaphysical flexing. Many Olympians are siblings, children or spouses of each other, or all three. The family tree looks like it was designed by someone who misunderstood the concept of branches entirely. But hey, divine rules are different apparently. Now scholars still debate whether the 12 Olympians were a consistent group. Some lists swap in Hades or Hestia. Some throw in different deities depending on regional cults. The whole concept may have been more fluid than textbook mythology suggests. Were they really a ruling council or just the most popular deities elevated? By certain poets, we'll probably never know for sure. But what we do know is that each of them had a distinct personality, fan base, and drama, which means tonight's story is going to be anything but dull. So we'll come to Olympus, friend. You've got a front row seat to a divine drama that shaped Western civilization. Just try not to catch a stray thunderbolt or get turned into a tree. Okay, Zeus. You've seen him in paintings, statues, maybe even in video games. Hulking guy with a beard eagle overhead, thunderbolt in hand like he's about to drop the hottest weather. Mixtape of all time? But beyond the impressive abs and stormy gaze, what was he really like? Well, imagine your loudest, most dramatical, then give him the power to control the sky, immortality, and a deep aversion to keeping his Tauron. That's Zeus in a nutshell. He isn't just the king of the gods. He's the king of getting his way. Throne sits in the center of Olympus, carved from storm clouds and framed by lightning. When he walks into the room, things hush. Not out of respect, but because everyone's waiting to see what mood he's in. He could bless you with a golden crown or turn you into a goose or, turn himself into a goose and seduce someone. Did it? Happened more than once. First glance, Zeus seems like the classic ruler. Decisive, powerful, always ready to smite someone for looking at him wrong. But the truth is, he's got the emotional range of a caffeinated soap opera star. He gets jealous. He gets insecure. He throws thunderbolts the way a toddler throws crayons. And when it comes to love, oh boy, Zeus doesn't fall in love. He hunts it in various forms. Sometimes he's a bull, sometimes he's Aswan. Once he showed up as a golden shower. We're not making that up. His relationships rarely end well. Not for the women involved, not for their mortal husbands, and definitely not for his wife who has to watch this eternal drama unfold while maintaining queen status. You'd think being the top god would come with some maturity, but nope. Zeus is the original do as I say, not as I do guy. He punishes humans for lying while shapeshifting into farm animals to sneak into women's bedrooms. Historical bits. In many myths, Zeus actually overthrew his father Cronus, who'd been devouring his children whole to avoid being usured. Classic parenting. Zeus tricked Cronus into vomiting up his siblings, then led a 10-year war against the older, the generation of gods, the Titans. This wasn't just a battle. It was the first divine family feud on record. When he finally won, Zeus split the world into three with his brothers. Poseidon got the sea, Hades got the underworld, and Zeus took the sky. Because of course despite, the drama Zeus wasn't just a raging storm in sandals. Could be wise. Occasionally he was known as the protector of hospitality, justice, and oaths, at least when it didn't interfere with his latest romantic plotline. People prayed to him before weddings, trials, and battles. His temples, especially the one at Olympia, were colossal, and sacrifices to him were usually the biggest and bloodiest. You wanted Zeus on your side because when he wasn't, your city might experience an unseasonal hurricane or get flattened by a magical cow. Now for a weird but fascinating fact. In some local myths, Zeus dies. Yeah, it's not widely known, but a few ancient writers suggest that in certain regional traditions Zeus had a tomb. There's even a spot on the island of Crete where some locals insisted he was buried. It's a fringe idea mostly rejected by the dominant mythos, but it tells us something interesting. How the gods, even the mighty Zeus, weren't always as immortal as we think. Some scholars think this reflects older earth god traditions where divine figures die and are reborn like crops. Others argue it's just early fan fiction. Debate's still alive, which is wild when you remember we're talking about someone people used to sacrifice bulls too. Also up for debate. Was Zeus always this Zeus? Some scholars argue that the thunder-hurling throne-sitting Zeus of Homer and Hesiod is a mashup of earlier sky gods from different regions. One possibility is that he was, originally, a weather god absorbed into a broader pantheon, gaining kingly traits along the way. In other words, Zeus may have started as just a storm guy and evolved into the messy boss of the universe once mythmakers needed a central authority figure. Basically, the ancient version of rebranding. But whether he was born to rule or made into a monarch by mythic politics, one thing's for sure: Zeus never stays quiet. He is the drama. He is the storm. He doesn't just rule Olympus. He is Olympus in all its power-hungry, scandal-plagued, thunder-splintered glory. Still, it's weird how often he's fooled. Mortals trick him. His wife schemes behind his back, while titans try comebacks under his nose. For someone who can hear every oath and see everything from the sky, he's surprisingly easy to outmaneuver. Maybe it's arrogance. Maybe it's the eternal distraction of chasing affection. Or maybe, just maybe, immortality comes with a blind spot for your own nonsense. So as you gaze up at the sky tonight, remember every flash of lightning, every sudden rumble could just be Zeus expressing himself, or throwing a tantrum, or trying to impress someone who's already sworn a chastity vow again. Now let's talk about Hera, Zeus's wife, queen of the gods, and the undisputed empress of holding a grudge. If Olympus had an HR department, Hera would run it with icy precision and a smile that could curdle milk. She's the goddess of marriage and childbirth. Don't let that wholesome title fool you. Hero is regal, brilliant, cunning, and absolutely done with everyone's nonsense, especially her husband's. Being married to Zeus is not a peaceful arrangement. It's a full-time war zone with brief moments of diplomacy and a lot of passive-aggressive lightning storms. Zeus cheats constantly, openly, sometimes subtly, most of the time, not at all. Hera, she doesn't take that lying down. No, she takes it personally, and then she acts. And she doesn't usually go after Zeus directly. Why bother when you can ruin the lives off his lovers and their offspring instead? Which sounds harsh, sure, but picture it from her side. Hera is the cosmic embodiment of sacred vows. Every betrayal hits her like a thunderbolt to the gut. But instead of crying in the bath with a box of ambrosia-flavored chocolates, she unleashes slow, devastating revenge. She's not chaotic. She's surgical. You crosshair her, and you'll spend the rest of your life being turned into a cow, a bird, or wandering through cursed lands with monsters at tour heels. Just ask Io or Leto or poor Semele, who got vaporized after Hera tricked her into asking Zeus to reveal his true form. Never ends well. Now let's not reduce her to just jealous wife tropes. Hera is more than that. She's a powerful matriarch in her own right. Daughter of Cronus and Rhea, she was swallowed at birth, as you do when your dad's terrified of being overthrown, and later rescued by her youngest brother Zeus. Not the most romantic origin story, but that's Divina royalty for you. When that Titanomachy, the war between the Olympians and Titans, ended, Zeus elevated Ha as queen of the heavens. Not just his consort, but his equal in status. Her throne on Olympus is just as grand as his, often adorned with peacock feathers and lies. And she rules over marriage law and feminine power with the kind of firm grip that suggests she's one step away from smiting someone for chewing too loudly at dinner. Peacocks, by the way, are her sacred animal. That's not just a Dasean choice. They're symbolic of her watchfulness. Legend says Hera created the peacock by placing the 100 eyes of her loyal servant Argus onto its tail feathers after Hermes, on Zeus's orders, tricked and killed him. So now every time you see a peacock strut like it owns the world, just remember it's basically carrying 1,000 years of divine surveillance and some serious hero energy. She also had children with Zeus, of course. Hey, the cupbearer of the gods. The goddess of childbirth, Ares Thegid of war. More on that hot mess later, and in some versions, her fastest god of the forge. Though fun twist, in certain myths, Hea births her Festus without Zeus's help at all, just to prove she can. Unfortunately, when he turns out with a limp, she's horrified and tosses him off Olympus. Not exactly Mother of the Year, but again, divine standards are weird. Still, Hera has moments of real depth, not just throwing thunderbolts and cursing nymphs. Sometimes she protects marriages, blesses women in labor, and acts as a guardian of order. In Homer's Iliad, she's strategic, manipulating divine politics to support the Greeks, arguing fiercely with Zeus, but still managing to keep her dignity mostly intact. There's this one scene where she seduces Zeus on top of Mount Ida, just to distract him from the Trojan War. She borrows Aphrodite's magic sash, flutters her lashes, and next thing you know, the king of the gods is knocked out cold in a post-divine Nuki coma, while the Greeks gain ground on the battlefield. Tactical romance at its finest. A quirky fact here had her own festivals, most notably the Heraia. These were women-only Olympic-style games held at Olympia in her honor. Girls competed in foot races dressed in short tunics that left their shoulders bare. The winner got the honor of lighting her altar. It's one of the few spaces in ancient Greek public life where women had the spotlight. And that's saying something in a culture that didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for ladies. The Heraia was less about brawn and more about celebrating feminine strength and divine favor. Totally in line with Hera's own brand of elegant dominance. Now here's the scholarly debate that stirs the mythological pot. Was Hera always portrayed this way? Some argue that her character evolved or maybe devolved over time. There's a theory that Hera was originally a major goddess on her own, possibly predating Zeus in some regions. She may have been a powerful mother goddess figure later relegated to wife status once the male-dominated Olympian structure took over. In that view, all her bitterness isn't just personal, it's political. It's the echo of an older divinity demoted, made to play second fiddle to her own rebellious brother, husband. Feminist reinterpretations of myth love to dig into this idea that Hera is the survivor of a system that constantly undercuts her, and she pushes back in the only ways the pantheon allows. So the next time you see Hera in a textbook or a marble sculpture, don't just think jealous goddess. Think of her as Olympus's steely backbone. It's the one who keeps the house in order while the thunder god gallivants across the cosmos. She's not just a queen, she's the queen, and she never forgets. If you have ever seen the sea look calm one second and absolutely murderous the next, you've already met Poseidon, at least in spirit. He's the god of the sea. Earthquakes and horses don't ask. And he's basically Zeus's moody, salt-encrusted brother, who never got over being second. Poseidon is not the quiet, mystical ocean type. He's more like the guy who owns a jet ski, drinks a lot of spiced rum, and yells at storms because they won't listen to him. On Olympus, Poseidon ranks just below Zeus in seniority, and he never lets anyone forget it. He's got that classic middle child energy, loud, reactive, and always slightly salty. Pun completely intended. His trident forged by the Cyclopus isn't just for show. With a single strike, he can shatter cliffs, summon tidal waves, or crack the earth like a sidewalk in an overdue earthquake. He doesn't walk so much as stomp. And when he's in a mood, you'll feel it in your teeth. But for all his bombast, Poseidon doesn't actually spend much time on Olympus. He prefers his undersea kingdom, a glimmering palace of coral and gems somewhere. Beneath the Aegean, down there everything is wet and opulent. Ceiling made of kelp, floors of pearl sea creatures drifting in and out like lazy courtiers. He sits on a throne carved from sea foam and whalebone, brooding over mortal ships and scheming about which coastal city hasn't sacrificed enough goats lately. Still, Poseidon doesn't just rule the sea. He is the sea in all its beauty and horror. He can be generous, calming storms, guiding sailors, safely blessing fishermen. Or he can snap and unleash a sea monster the size of a mountain to chew through a fleet like it's nothing. You really never know what you're going to get. He's one of those gods who remembers every slight, no matter how small, you forget to build. A temple. That's cute. Enjoy your next tsunami. And then there are his love affairs. Yes, Poseidon is right there with Zeus in the pantheon of divine wandering eyes. He's had relationships with sea Noise goddesses, mortals, and yep, Medusa. That particular incident was less of a romance and more of a scandal, depending on the version. Poseidon either seduced or assaulted Medusa inside Athena's temple, which ended with Athena cursing Medusa into the infamous Gorgon we know today. Not Poseidon's proudest moment. It's typical of Olympus. The woman gets punished while the guy just dusts off his hands and rides away on a magic hippocampus. Speaking of animals, you might wonder, What's the deal with Poseidon and horses? Well, in some myths, Poseidon literally creates the first horse as a failed attempt to woo the goddess to meet her. And after several creative misfires, some say he made a giraffe or camel. First, he finally nails it with the horse. She still rejects him, but hey, we got stallions out of the deal. From then on, Poseidon is linked to horses and chariot racing. Many Greek coastal cities held horse races in his honor. He's even were ripped as Poseidon Hippier's horse Poseidon, which, if nothing else, gives him a pretty unique resume. Now let's talk historical clout. In many coastal Greek cities, Poseidon was not just a sea god. He was the god. Sailors, fishermen, traders, basically anyone who didn't want to drown paid serious respect to him. Temples to Poseidon stood on high cliffs, overlooking treacherous waters. Offerings were tossed into the surf-wine bowls, sometimes unlucky prisoners. Anything to keep the sea in a good mood. If you were heading out to war by ship, you prayed to Poseidon first and hard. One of the most iconic temples is the Temple of Poseidon at Cape Sunyon, perched dramatically above the Aegean Sea. Sailors would spot it as they approached.
Athens and breath easier, knowing they'd made it.
Even today, it is a breathtaking spot. Sunset over the sea, marble glowing, the wind carrying whispers of ancient prayers. You can almost hear Poseidon grumbling beneath the waves. Poseidon once tried to be the patron god of Athens. Yeah, that Athens. He went head-to-head with Athena herself for the job. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident and made a saltwater spring, which was, kind of useless for drinking. Athena offered an olive tree practical, sustainable, and full of oil potential. The people of Athens chose Athena. Poseidon predictably did not take it well. He flooded parts of the land out of spite, which feels like the exact reaction someone would have if they lost a popularity contest and had unlimited water bombs. That brings us to the scholarly side of things. There's a long-standing theory that Poseidon wasn't originally a sea god at all. Some researchers think he started out as a land or even underworld deity associated with horses and earthquakes long before he picked up his trident. His name Poseidon may even mean something like husband of the earth. Over time, as the seafaring Greeks expanded, his domain shifted to match their needs. In this view, the trident came later as part of his oceanic glow-up. Whatever his origin, Poseidon is one of the most emotionally volatile gods on Olympus. He doesn't just feel things, he unleashes them. Anger becomes a wave. Disappointment becomes a drought. Joy, though rare, might bring smooth water sand, silver fish gliding beneath a full moon. You don't reason with Poseidon? Ride him out. So next time you're at the beach and the tide pulls just a little harder than usual, you might want to whisper a quiet apology just in case he's listening. Because if the sea is ever too still, too quiet, Poseidon might just be holding his breath. Down below, far from Olympus's glowing spires and Poseidon's crashing surf, there's a different kind of kingdom. Quiet, shadowy, slow, moving. This is where Hades rules. And no, it's not all fire and pitchforks. That's a later invention. The underworld of Greek myth is more like an endless, misty borderland where memories echo. Rivers whisper in languages only. The dead can hear, and everything is just a little too still. And right in the middle of it all sits Hades, the brooding third brother, quietly in charge of the most permanent job in the cosmos. Hades is not the devil. Let's just clear that up now. He's not evil. He's not out to tempt you. He doesn't have horns or a flaming whip. He's just the guy who gets stuck managing the dead. When Zeus and Poseidon divided up the universe, Hades got the short straw literally. His realm wasn't glamorous. It wasn't social. It was a one-way ticket to isolation, Hades being a god. Of duty more than drama, just took the job and made it work. His underworld isn't hellish, it's just final. Imagine a vast, dim land separated by rivers with names like Lethe Forgetfulness, Fleegan Fire and Styx. The one even gods swear by. Oh, souls. Wander. Judges assess their lives. And if you're especially heroic or horrific, you might end up in the Olympian fields or Tartarus. But most people, they drift quietly forever. Hades watches over them like a librarian of lost lives, more administrative than tyrannical. He's not flashy like his brothers. No thunderbolts, no earthquakes, no dramatic transformations into golden animals. Hades wears a dark robe, carries a scepter, and has a helmet that makes him invisible, subtle, effective, and deeply on brand. He rides a black chariot pulled by immortal horses and has a palace made of obsidian and shadow. It's all very goth, billionaire energy minus the eyeliner. Hades doesn't hang out on Olympus much. He's technically one of the 12 Olympians, depending on the source, but he rarely attends divine brunch. He's not antisocial, just busy. There's always someone dying, always a soul to receive. And honestly, most of the other gods don't love visiting him. There's a mething about being reminded of your own death that makes even immortals a little twitchy. But he's not cold. He's loyal, decisive, thoughtful. If Zeus is the storm and Poseidon the tide, Hades is the deep root, quiet, necessary, and immovable. His love story, twisted as it is, shows that hidden tenderness. Yes, we're talking about that love story, Persephone. So here's the myth in its basic dramatic outline. Hades sees Persephone, daughter of Deida, frolicking into a meadow. He's struck not just with desire, but with this odd sense of destiny. So naturally, instead of sending flowers or a polite letter of interest, he opens up the ground beneath her and drags her down into the underworld in his chariot. Yeah, not great, not subtle, not even remotely okay by modern standards. But then it gets complicated. Peskin doesn't stay a prisoner forever. For time depending on the version of the story she grows into, her role becomes queen takes on. Some of Hades' authority. They rule side by side, and when Dia threatens to kill all crops and freeze the world until her daughter is returned, a compromise is struck. Persephone will spend part of the year above ground with her mother and part of it below with her husband. Cue the changing seasons, spring and summer when she returns, fall and winter when she leaves, is one of the most poetic explanations for the natural cycle. And in some tellings, Persephone actually chooses to eat the pomegranate cedars that bind her to the underworld. Maybe she doesn't just accept Hades. Maybe Chase sees something in him no one else does. A strange little detail. Hades is one of the few gods who doesn't cheat. Not even once. No long trail of nymphs. No sneaky transformations. Just him and Persephone. In the chaotic jungle of Olympian romance that's practically saintly. And here's a scholarly debate that won't go away. Was Hades really a god in his own right? Or just another name for death? Some ancient sources blur the line between Hades the god and Hades the place. Others distinguish him from Thanos, the actual personification of death. It's a little confusing, and that might be the point. Exists in the liminal space between life and afterlife, between God and fate, between feared and misunderstood. One weird fact, despite being the god of the dead, Hades was rarely depicted in temples or given many direct offerings. Ancient Greeks were wary of saying his name at all. Some preferred euphemisms like Pluto, meaning the rich one because the underworld is full of souls and metaphorically gold. It was a mix off respect and superstone. Say his name too loud and he might notice you. And if he notices you, well, let's just say there are no vacations from the underworld. And yet Hades has this quiet dignity. While Zeus is throwing parties and Poseidon is picking fights, Hades stays steady. He's the only one who doesn't play games with mortals for fun. He doesn't send monsters just to stir the pot. He honors agreements, keeps to his realm, does his job in a pantheon full of messy chaos that makes him a rare thing reliable. So next time you hear thunder or sea waves crash, remember, deep beneath it all, there's a quiet throne and a shadowy palace where Hades watches, waits, and keeps the balance. And not a villain, not a hero, just the inevitable end of every story, and the one god who never pretends otherwise. Step aside, boys. Da is entering the story, and she's got harvest to bless and grudges to carry. She's the goddess of agriculture, grain fertility, and the general miracle of food showing up on your plate. But don't let the pastoral vibe fool you. Diata is not just some soft-spoken earth mum weaving flower crowns. She is ancient, powerful, and capable of freezing the entire planet just because she's upset. And honestly, respect. Da is one of the older deities in the pantheon, and her energy feels different. Less flashy, more primal. She's tied to the land. 2 cycles to growth and decay. While Zeus is throwing tantrums in the clouds and Poseidon is crashing waves just to feel something, Deities down here managing literal life on Earth. She makes things grow. She feeds cities. She keeps humanity from turning into a pile of starving skeletons. If that doesn't qualify as divine royalty, what does? Now, her most famous myth is the Persephone one. And yes, we already peeked at it through Hades' dimly lit lens. But let's look at it again. This time from Deities' point of view. Picture this. Your daughter, your light, your pride, your one emotional tether, and the fish-shot mess of a pantheon is out picking flowers. And the next thing you know, boom, she's swallowed up by the earth. Gone. No goodbye. Just vanishes. Deita understandably loses it. She stops everything. No more grain. No more fruit. Fields wither. Animals die off. Rivers slow. The planet turns cold and brittle. A suspended breath waiting for the warmth to return.
Out, mortals.
Panicking. Sacrifices go unburned. The gods themselves begin to sweat. If humanity dies off, who's going to build temples and sing hymns? And Zeus, finally noticing that maybe ignoring Deita wasn't the smartest idea, sends messengers down to sort it out. Eventually, Persephone comes back. But she's eaten those pomegranate seeds, and now she has to spend part of the year in the underworld. That compromise creates the seasons, sure, but more than that, it reveals Deita's depth. She's not just a mom. She's a force. A reminder that when the goddess of life mourns, the world mourns with her. And let's be clear, she never gets over it. Not completely. Even after the deal is made every year when Persephone returns to the underworld, Deita retreats. That's autumn, then winter. Her grief preys like a seasonal memory etched into the soil. It's a heartbreaking rhythm, but also beautiful because it shows how even goddesses can't outrun loss. Deita doesn't lash out like Hera. She doesn't explode like Zeus. She withdraws. She lets the absence speak. And that silence, it's louder than thunder. But she's not just the goddess of grief. Deita's power has joy too. She invented bread for starters. Let's all take a moment of quiet appreciation for carbs and taught humanity how to plant and harvest. The Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most sacred religious rites in ancient Greece, were centered around her and Persephone. We don't know the exact details on pain of divine punishment. Participants weren't allowed to spill the beans, but we know. It was deeply symbolic, tied to death, birth, and the hope of life after. It offered spiritual reassurance in a world where even the gods played dirty. A quirky little fact, Deita once tried to make a mortal baby immortal. During her wandering, grief-soaked search for Persephone, she disguised herself and worked as a nursemaid. She took a liking to the baby and began placing him in the fire at night to burn away his mortality. The kid's mom walked in on it, screamed, and ruined the process. Deita ticked off, revealed her full divine glory, dropped some metaphysical truth bombs, and left. Their kid didn't become immortal, but a temple was built in his honor, so decent trade. Deita's symbols are all lush and grainy. Wheat stalks, poppies. Cornucopias, torches. She's often shown with a serene face and full hands. But behind that calm exterior is a spine of iron. She's one of the few deities who challenged Zeus in one. He could hurl thunderbolts all day, but he couldn't grow wheat. And without wheat, there's no worship, no offerings, no civilization, no power. Deita reminds him and us that nurturing is just as mighty as conquering. Now, here's a scholarly debate for your pillow. Was Deita originally a pre-Greek deity, absorbed into the Olympian system? Some evidence points that way. Her worship predates many of the male gods, and her connection to earth-based rites suggests she might have been part of a mother goddess tradition that stretched across the Mediterranean. In that context, her position in the pantheon as one of the older siblings, quieter but indispensable, makes a lot of sense. She wasn't added for flair. She was already there. And yet over time, her story gets squeezed into the margins. She doesn't appear in a ton of heroic tales. She doesn't start wars or seduce kings. She just makes the world livable, which ironically might make her the most essential god of all. So if you ever feel like the world's gone cold or something precious has vanished into the shadows, light a candle, whisper her name, and plant something. Because Deida listens. She knows what it means to grieve. She knows how to wait for the green to return. Athena enters like a whisper cutting through a battlefield. Calm, controlled, and 10 moves ahead of you. She's the goddess of wisdom, strategy, warfare, the clever kind, not the messy bloodbath stuff. Crafts and generally not putting up with anybody's nonsense. She doesn't explode like Zeus or sulk like Hades. Athena calculates, observes, then moves. And when she does, it's game over. She wasn't born so much as detonated into existence. Zeus, after swallowing her pregnant mother, the goddess of wisdom no less, develops. A splitting headache, not metaphorically. We're talking a literal cranial crisis. So naturally, he asks her Phacus to crack open his skull with an axe. As one does, and outbursts. Athena fully grown, fully armored, and probably already disappointed in everyone. That's her entrance 0. Childhood 0, awkward teen phase just instant. Adult genius in a bronze skirt. Athena's divine kind vibe, a mix of military general philosophy, professor, and emotionally unavailable mentor. She values logic over impulse, order over chaos. She's not big on emotional messiances, hers or yours. If you show up crying about heartbreak or hubris, she'll give you a book illume and a raised eyebrow. Fix it yourself, champ. She's not anti-war, far from it, but she's all about strategy. If Ares is the embodiment of brute force, brawling Athena is the commander who studies terrain, knows his enemy supplet lines, and already bribed the enemy's second in command before sunrise. She's the chessboard in human affairs. In Homer's Iliad, she's a behind-the-scenes puppeteer, nudging mortals with a smirk and a nudge, always guiding, rarely failing. Athens, the city named after her, chose her over Poseidon in that famous contest. Remember Poseidon's saltwater spring? Well, Athena planted the first olive tree instead. Useful, life-giving, not at all dramatic. The citizens went, "Yep, that's our girl." The tree wasn't just symbolic. It represented everything she stood for. Wisdom, peace, prosperity, and a solid export economy. Now, Athena is one of the few Olympian goddesses who stays firmly unmarried. No flings, no diances, no stolen nights in flowered meadows. She's so uninterested in romance it became part of her brand. She's often called Athena Parthnos. Athena the Virgin, and the massive statue of her in the Pantheon held that title like a badge of honor. It wasn't just about abstinence. It was about autonomy. Athena doesn't belong to anyone. She doesn't fall. She doesn't bend. She stands. That independence, though, comes with a reputation. She's often cold, sometimes harsh. Take the story of Iraq, a mortal woman who dared to challenge Athena to a weaving contest. Bold move. Iraq was good. So good. In fact, that she may have actually won. But instead of basking in mutual admiration, Athena destroyed her tapestry and turned her into a spider. Lesson learned. Don't sass the goddess off crafts with your superior embroidery. And yet Athena is deeply involved in mortal lives. She mentors heroes. She pops up to help Odysseus, constantly disguising herself, planting ideas in heads, pushing people toward wisdom instead of violence. In the Odyssey, she's not just his divine helper. She's basically the co-author of his success. When he finally makes it home, it's Athena who ensures peace, stability, and long overdue closure. While other gods start wars, Athena ends them. Let's take a weird little side fact here. Athena's sacred animal is the owl. You knew that. But what you may not know is that in some interpretations, the owl isn't just a symbol of wisdom. It's a surveillance device. In certain ancient texts, her owl is said to be able to see in the dark, through lies, even into your thoughts. It's not just that Athena is smart. She sees what others can't. So whether that's metaphorical or some divine spyware situation is up to you. Her symbols, helmets, spears, shields to live branches are all paradoxes of peace and war. She's the only one who can carry both and not seem hypocritical. And let's not forget the Aegis, a magical shield often described as having the head of Medusa on it. It turns enemies to stone just by being glanced at. Casual? No big deal. Just a war accessory that can ruin your whole life. Now here's where things get sticky. Some scholars argue that Athena's virgin persona is a later evolution crafted by patriarchal society to make her more acceptable, safe. Eventhy theory goes that by stripping away her sexuality, the male-dominated society could keep her powerful but non-threatening. Others disagree, pointing out that her autonomy is her power, that she doesn't need male validation or romantic entanglement to be complete. She's full-spectrum divinity on her own. And then there's the even deeper theory that Athena wasn't originally a war goddess at all. Some believe she started as a local deity of crafts and domestic intelligence in Mycenaean Greece, latter merged with warrior traditions to form the Athena we know. Her character in this view is a composite, its logic and power fused into a divine diplomat, a Greek Frankenstein of intellect and iron. Regardless, Athena's popularity never faded. She was loved by cities, generals, artisans, and thinkers. Her statue stood tall in temples and battlefields alike. To pray to Athena was to seek clarity in confusion, strategy, and chaos. She was the one you called when your brain needed to fight smarter, not harder. So if you've ever walked into a room with a plan when everyone else had a panic or sat quietly at a table while calculating 10 different outcomes, you've channeled Athena. Not because you're cold, but because you understand that strength without. Thinking is just noise, and noise never wins wars. Wisdom does. Apollo arrives like the golden hour itself, flawless, radiant, and more than a little full of himself. He's the god of music, prophecy, healing disease. Yes, both ends of the medical spectrum. The sun, archery, poetry, and Pridimac, anything that requires skill and applause. If the Greek gods were a band, Apollo would be the lead singer, the songwriter. And the guy who insists on directing the music video? You want brilliance? He's got it. You want humility? Try again. He's the twin brother of Artemis, born on the windswept island of Dos. After his mother, Leto, wandered the earth in labor because he had banned her from giving birth anywhere the sun touched. Classic Hera. But when Leto finally finds that loophole, of a floating island, she gives birth to Apollo and Artemis, to gods so powerful that even as newborns they were already intimidating. Apollo in particular wastes no time. Within days of his birth, he slays the Python at Delphi, a monstrous serpent guarding the site of the future oracle. That's like showing up to your first day of school and immediately defeating the final boss. From then on, Delphi becomes Apollos, sacred site. The oracle there, the Pythia, speaks in riddles and visions, supposedly channeling his divine wisdom. Kings and commoners alike would travel across dangerous terrain just to ask vague questions and receive even vaguer answers. Will I win the war? Gets answered with something like the great empire shall fall, which depending on your ego could mean either amazing news or catastrophic failure.
Apollo's
always been a fan of poetic ambiguity. But there's more to Apollo than prophecy. His presence is dazzling, literally. He's the god of the sun, or at least he becomes associated with it later in Greek myth, often merging with the older solar deity Helios. Every day he's imagined steering a golden chariot across the sky, dragging the sun behind him like it's just another trophy in his endless divine collection. Golden hair, golden in lyre, golden everything. He's the poster god for high-functioning narcissism, and he plays that lyre like nobody else. Music isn't just a hobby for Apollo, it's a weapon, bomb, and a form of dominion. He can charm God's mortals and animals with his melodies. He teaches them muses, inspires poets, and basically invented the ancient equivalent of Spotify minus the ads. But if you try to upstage him, oh no, just ask Marcus the setter who challenged Apollo to a music contest. Marcus played the ouz, a kind of double flute, and was really good. Too good. Apollo won the contest probably by cheating, honestly. And as punishment, he flayed Marius alive. So yeah, don't try to outshine the sun. Apollo's love life, for all his charm, is a trail of heartbreak and transformation. His mitten Islian hard, but it never ends well. Daphne, a nymph who wanted nothing to do with him, ended up turning into a laurel tree to escape his pursuit. Apollo, in classic fashion, then made the laurel his sacred symbol. Nothing says I respect your boundaries like turning your ex into a piece of jewelry. Another painful love story, Hyanthos, a beautiful Spartan youth Apollo adored. They were playing discus very romantically, and Apollo accidentally kills him with a misthrown disc. Or maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Some Messians say the wind god Zephyrus was jealous and redirected the discus mid-air. Either way, Hyanthos dies, and Apollo, devastated, creates the higher flower from his blood, which is tragic, poetic, and exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from the god, who composes elegies about his own failures. And then there's Coronas, a mortal. Woman Apollo loved who cheated on him with a mortal man. When he finds out through his all-seeing raven, he kills her, but she's pregnant with his child, so he snatches the baby from her funeral pea just in time. That child, Asclepius, the future god of medicine. So even Apollo's rage has a silver lining. What kind of Apollo's symbols are as dramatic as he is? The lyre, of course, the laurel wreath, the python, the sun chariot, the bow and arrow, because yes, even the radiant god of harmony has a weapon. He's the embodiment of duality, beauty and death, healing and disease, clarity and confusion. He sends plagues and cures them. He lifts the veil of truth-and clouds it again with riddles. Worshipping him meant walking that tightrope of adoration and fear. Now here's the Scully curveball. Some experts argue that Apollo isn't originally Greek. His name doesn't have a clear Indo-European root like most Olympians. Some think he might have come from Anatolia, or even the Near East, absorbed into Greek religion as his cult spread. That could explain his complex mashup of sun god musician and plague bringer traits. He's not so much consistent as he is compelling. A diviner remix of many older archetypes. And then there's his relationship with Artemis. Twins, yes, but wildly different. Where Artemis is cold, wild, and untouched, Apollo is polished, refined, and a bit of a show-off. But they're fiercely loyal to each other. Once, when Niobe mocked their mother Leto for having only 2 children, Artemis and Apollo responded by killing all of Niobe's children. Subtlety isn't their strong suit. That solidarity? Absolutely. Apollo is what happens when light gets ego. He walks into a room and blinds it. He sings a note and the room dissolves. He knows he's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And if you forget, don't worry. He'll remind you with a song and maybe a strategically launched plague if you're being difficult. So if you've ever met someone who's multi-talented, magnetic, and just a little too aware of it, congrats. You've glimpsed Apollo. Just hope you're not holding a flute when he shows up. Thomas doesn't knock. She doesn't enter. She arrives all cool shadows and sharpened arrows, with a look that says she'll shoot you in the kneecap if you ask about her love life. She's the goddess of the hunt. The moon wild animals, chastity and midwifery. Basically the divine embodiment of do not disturb. If Apollo is the golden, glittering heartthrob of Olympus, Artemis is the quiet twin who vanishes into the woods and comes back. With a deer slung over her shoulder and zero commentary, born just before her brother, she's the firstborn of Leto and Zeus, and she makes her presence known immediately. According to myth, she helped deliver Apollo the moment she herself was born. Yes, you read that right. Infant Artemis took one look at the situation, rolled up her divine sleeves, and played midwife for her own mother. That's her whole energy in a nutshell. Independent, competent, and not here for your drama. From the start, Artemis is clear about what she wants and doesn't want. She marches up to Zeus, her thunderbolt happy dad, and demands eternal virginity. A silver bow, a pack of loyal nymphs, and the freedom to roam wherever she pleases. Zeus, to his credit, says yes, probably because he knows better than to argue with a baby goddess already making threats. She gets her bow from her fist as her hunting. Dogs from Pan, and her reputation from centuries of avoiding every romantic advance ever thrown her way. She lives outside the boundaries, literally. Artemis makes her home in the forests and mountains, far from Olympus's golden halls and godly eco-fests. Her retinue is a squad of nymphs who have all taken the same vow of chastity, and they run hunt, swim, and spar together under moonlight. They don't want husbands. They don't want babies. They want freedom, and Artemis gives it to them. That said, Artemis isn't exactly known for forgiveness. Cross her and it's over. Let's take action, for example. A mortal hunter who have accidentally stumbled upon her bathing in the woods. An innocent mistake, Sherbet. Artemis didn't exactly pause for nuance. She turned him into a stag and let his own hunting dogs tear him apart. Another time, the hunter Orion. Yes, that Orion gets too friendly or crosses a line. The myths vary wildly, and Artemis ends up killing him either directly or indirectly. In some versions, she does it by mistake after being tricked by Apollo. Either way, the guy ends up immortalized as a constellation, which is kind of sweet, kind of traumatic, and extremely on brand for the gods. For mortals, Artemisis, a paradox. She protects women in childbirth, a brutal sacred moment, but also guards her own virginity with lethal precision. She's associated with deer and rabbits, soft and gentle creatures. Yet she's the goddess of the hunt, releasing arrows without a second thought. She inspires awe, but rarely affection. Pray to her not because you feel close to her, but because you want to stay out of her way? And yet she is deeply protective, especially of young girls, animals, and any vulnerable to the cruel hands of men. Artemis doesn't just exist outside the patriarchy. She's a full-blown rebellion wrapped in moonlight. She won't be possessed, defined, or restrained. She gives mortals a glimpse of untamed power, the kind that doesn't seek approval, the kind that walks barefoot through ancient forests and never looks back. A quirky bit of lore, she's sometimes tied to the moon, but that wasn't always the case. In older myths, Selene was the moon goddess riding a chariot of silver across the night sky. Over time, Artemis absorbed that imagery, becoming not just a huntress, but a lunar figure, cold, luminous, remote. Her connection to cycles, especially menstrual and fertility cycles, likely contributed to that transformation. The moon became a mirror of her emotional detachment. Beautiful, distant, untouchable. Dada. One of Artemis' strangest but most revealing myths is the one about Iphigenia. During the Trojan War, the Greeks offend Artemis, probably by killing one of her sacred deer. Ange demands a sacrifice. The chosen victim, Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon. The king lies to his wife and daughter to lure Iphigenia to the altar. Just as the knife is raised, Artemis either lets the girl be sacrificed or swaps her out with a deer and spirits her away to become a priestess in a distant land. The versions differ, but the takeaway is the same. Artemis demands respect, and even when she shows mercy, it's laced with consequences. Worship of Artemis was widespread, especially in rural areas, where sanctuaries were often deep in the woods or on the edges of civilization, places where nature reigned. One of the most famous centers of her worship was at Ephesus, where she was revered in a very different form, more motherly, fertility-focused, and covered in what may or may not have been multiple breasts, or maybe bull testicles. Scholars debate that one endlessly with no consensus in sight. What's clear is that Artemis could shapeshift culturally fitting into different regions with different meanings. It was wild freedom in one place, maternal fertility in another. Try putting that on a business card. Now for the debate that stirs mythologists into full scholarly brawls. Was Artemis always a huntress? Or was she originally an ancient fertility goddess who got recast through a patriarchal lens into something safer and more pure? Some argue that her emphasis on virginity and isolation reflects an older, deeper archetype of feminine power that didn't need male gods or marriage. Others say her role was always dual birth and death, blood and moonlight, and that trying to pin her down is like trying to capture a shadow, which honestly feels exactly right. Artemis doesn't offer comfort. She offers clarity. You're either in line with nature, with her code, or you're not. There's no moral gray, no gentle lesson, just the cold snap of her boring. But if you respect her space, protect the wild and walk, Lightly through the world, she might just let you pass, maybe even guide your path by the light of her moon. So if you've ever felt the call of solitude or that stubborn spark that says no when everyone expects yes, you've walked with Artemis. And if you ever find yourself alone in the woods under a full moon and something stirs the leaves without making a sound, don't run. Just nod and keep walking. Just watching, and she respects confidence. Here he comes, helmet gleaming, chest-puffed eyes, bloodshot from a lifetime of rage and maybe 2 hours of sleep. Ares' god-awful is stomping onto the scene like the human embodiment of a bar fight. You can hear him before you see him. Metal clanking, sword scraping, battle cries echoing from nowhere. It's not just war, it's violence, in all its hot, sweaty, emotional mess. While Athena plans and plots her elegant strategies, Ares just throws himself into the carnage, headers screaming, swinging, breaking things, and probably loving every second of it. He's the son of Zeus and Hera, which might explain a lot. Born into a household where betrayal was practically breakfast and arguments. Echoed through the clouds, Ares was never going to be a sensitive poet. He was born to punch things. And yet, despite being a full-fledged Olympian, Ares is kind of unpopular. Other gods see him as immature, reckless, and mostly useless. Even Zeus calls him a nuisance. His own father says he's obnoxious, which is a pretty harsh performance review coming from a guy who turns into swans to cheat on his wife. But that doesn't stop Ares from doing his thing. He doesn't need their approval. It's got battlefields to haunt. Unlike Athena, who represents strategic warfare and clever maneuvering, Ares is the raw, primal force of bloodshed. He's the flash of panic before the first spear is thrown. He's the roar of pain and fury when shields break. He doesn't care about the cause, only the clash. He's there for the adrenaline, the fire, the noise. If wars had groupies, Ares would be the one shirtless on the stage, covered in blood, basking in the chaos, like a rock star after a 3-day bender. He's often accompanied by his own twisted little entourage, Elbo's fear and Deimos' terror. His sons with Aphrodite follow him into every battle, whispering dread into soldiers' ears. Enio, the goddess of war's destruction, walks beside him like a twin flame. Sometimes even Ares, goddess of strife, tags along to stir up more drama. Together they form a kind of demonic marching band, crashing into conflicts and turning everything into a symphony off carnage. And yet, despite all that swagger, Ares is surprisingly bad at war. At least in the myths, he loses a lot. Gets wounded by mortals, dragged off the battlefield, crying. At one point in the Iliad, he gets speared by Athena, his rival, and literally whines to Zeus about it, pleads. Echor, the divine version of blood, howls in pain and retreats. It's not a good look for a god who claims to love the fight. He sure seems fragile when he's not winning. Still, he's not all doom and gloom. In some versions of myth, especially outside the Homeric tradition, Ares is more than just a bruiser. In Thrace, where his cult was strongest, he was seen as a vital force of manhood, courage, and masculine potency. His warlike energy wasn't just destruction. It was power, vitality, even fertility. He's raw energy without apology. Sometimes that's exactly what a society wants or fears. And speaking of raw energy, let's talk about his affair with Aphrodite. Because, oh yes, it's a thing. She's married to her Hephaestus, but she and Ares are the worst kept secret on an Olympus. They sneak around constantly thinking they're being subtle, while everyone, including the mortals, is fully aware. One day Hephaestus decides he's had enough. He crafts an invisible net, catches them mid-fling in bed, and drags all the other gods in to laugh at them. That moment is immortalized in myth as both scandal and slapstick nude gods, tangled in golden wires, humiliated while everyone watches, and Ares still completely into her. The man has no shame. There's a weird little fact that adds to his chaos. Cred. Ares had a sacred city called Thyske, ruled by the legendary Amazon warrior women who were said to be his daughters. These weren't shy forest nymphs. They were battle-hardened, independent, and utterly uninterested in anyone's patriarchal nonsense. Ares may not have been loved by the other Olympians, but among the Amazon he was respected, maybe even revered. He wasn't about laws or order or divine plans. He was about power, passion, and fighting for the sake of it. And in a way, the Amazons got that. Historically, Ares never had the kind of widespread devotion other gods enjoyed. His temples were fewer, His festivals less flashy. People honored him when they had to before a battle after a victory. But no one really wanted to hang out with him. He wasn't the god of peace or prosperity or divine wisdom. He was that friend you only call when things are really about to go sideways. And yet scholars still debate his role as Ares. Left over from an older, more brutal pantheon, a Thracian import absorbed into the Greek system, tolerated but not celebrated. Or was he intentionally written as a cautionary tale? A warning against uncontrolled emotion, unchecked violence, and two, much testosterone without a strategy. He's a god who tells us what happens when brute force gets elevated above reason. A lot of noise, a lot of blood, and not much else. Still, you can't fully hate Ares. There's something honest about him. He doesn't pretend to be noble. He doesn't cloak his desires in poetry. He's upfront, and he likes war. He likes winning. He's bad at losing and worse at reflection. And in a pantheon full of liars, tricksters, and manipulators, that kind of blunt force honesty is weirdly refreshing. So if you ever find yourself in a shouting match you didn't start, or you feel your blood boil for no apparent reason, or you dream about punching someone Butu, don't because you're a civilized person. Just know that's Ares. He's still around, still stomping through human emotions like a wrecking ball with feelings. And sometimes in a chaotic world we need gods like him, if only to remind us what not to become. Let's be honest. If the Olympian gods were a high school Aphrodite, would be the one everyone simultaneously worships, gossips about, and Loki resents. The goddess of love, beauty, sex, desire, and the occasional dose of extremely inconvenient drama. Aphrodite doesn't. Walk, she glides. Doves trail behind her. Flowers bloom under her feet. And everyone literally stares. She's not just beautiful, she's beauty itself weaponized and wrapped in silk. With a smile that could derail your life in 5 seconds flat, her origin story is a mythological fever dream. In the most famous version, she's born from the sea foam. Literally from the aftermath of Uranus's severed genitals being thrown into the ocean. Yeah, romantic, right? One violent act of divine emasculation, a splash of immortal biology, and boom, Aphrodite. Rises from the waves like a divine supermodel, already perfect and possibly humming a seductive melody. Botticelli's Birth of Venus tried to capture it. Let's be real, he toned it down for the audience. Unlike most of the other gods, Aphrodite doesn't need thunderbolts, swords, or dramatic chariots to assert her power. She has something far more dangerous. Attraction. People fall in love with her. Through her because of her influences emotions. Clouds judgment, and stirs the pot of every romantic entanglement in mythology. She can spark a lifelong bond or wreck your whole marriage just by batting her lashes. Now you'd think a goddess so defined by love would be gentle. Nope, Aphrodite is complicated. Sometimes she's kind, sure bringing couples together, blessing marriages, inspiring poets, but other times she's the reason someone ends up weeping on a cliff. Because they got turned into a flower or a tree after treeing to flirt with the wrong person. Love in her hands is never safe. It's unpredictable, overwhelming, and often deeply unfair. Take poor Inaza's immortal who caught her eye. She shows up in disguise, seduces him, and only afterward reveals her true identity. Surprise. You just slept. With a goddess, he's so terrified he can barely speak. Their child Anius, the future founder of Rome. No big deal. Aphrodite's love doesn't just create new myths. It creates civilizations, or destroys them depending on the day. And then there's her relationship with Hephaestus, the god of fire and metalwork. It's an arranged marriage. Zeus basically gives her to Hephaestus to avoid a divine brawl among the gods, all vying for her attention. But Aphrodite not interested. She cheats on him constantly, especially with Ares, the god of war, which says a lot. She's married to the quiet, brilliant blacksmith and keeps sneaking around with the walking temper tantrum in bronze armor. Less about affection and more about heat passion over patience. Of course, this all backfires. Remember the golden net trap? Hephaestus crafts a fine, nearly invisible net to catch Aphrodite and Ares' midriff. He then drags their tangled, embarrassed bodies into the Olympian throne room so everyone can see. Cue laughter, awkward silence, and probably a few immortal therapists doing overtime. But Aphrodite isn't shamed. And she's annoyed, sure, but she brushes it off. If you're the goddess of desire, scandalous, just part of the job. Her symbols, roses, doves, mirrors, swans, are all soft, seductive, and carefully curated, but they conceal a wild edge. One of her oldest cult titles is Aphrodite era, warlike, Aphrodite. That's right. Even the goddess of love has a battle mode. In some cities, especially in earlier versions of her worship, she wasn't just about passion. She was about power, the kind that conquers without touching a blade, and her influence absolutely everywhere. The Trojan War literalist starts because of her during the divine beauty contest, Paris choosing between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. She bribes him with the most beautiful mortal woman alive, Helen. Paris accepts. Helen gets taken. And suddenly Greece and Troy are in a decade-long disaster because one goddess couldn't resist showing off. That's Aphrodite in a nutshell. Beautiful, brilliant, and completely unaware or uncaring of the consequences. A quirky side note, Aphrodite had a magical belt, sometimes called a girdle witch. Sounds more like underwear than it should, that made anyone who saw her instantly infatuated. Hera borrows it once to seduce Zeus because even gods need a little help now and then. In modern terms, it's basically the divine equivalent of an unbeatable dating profile and a really good lighting filter. But here's the academic twist. Aphrodite may not have been Greek to begin with. Some scholars trace her origins to Eastern goddesses like Ishtar or Astarte, deities of love, fertility, and war from Mesopotamia and the Levant. This would explain her complex nature. She's not just a flirt with a seashell. She's a deep, ancient force layered with passion and danger. As she was absorbed into the Greek pantheon, she kept those old-world vibes under a shiny golden filter. And let's not forget her more tender side. Aphrodite isn't just about carnal desire. She's the mother of Eos. Yes, that owes the mischievous god of love, and often steps into the role of protector for lovers and those broken by love. She can be generous, even gentle when she's not busy lighting hearts on fire just to watch what happens. There are stories where she helps mortals find real happiness. It just doesn't happen very often. Aphrodite doesn't operate in fairness. She operates in intensity. You might fall in love thanks to her, but you might also drown in it. She teaches that beauty is powerful but not always kind, that desire can uplift or undo, that love is as much about chaos as it is about connection. So if you've ever written a bad poem about someone who didn't text you back or made a terrible decision because of a crush or fallen, headfirst into something you knew would end badly you've brushed against. Aphrodite's wake. And if you're lucky, all you got was a good story and not a full-blown myth. Now let's lower the volume and strike a hammer to metal because it's time to talk. The god of fire forges blacksmithing invention and some seriously underappreciated emotional diff. He's not the shiniest god on Olympus. Not the most charming or flashy. In fact, he's kind of the opposite. Limping, strict, reclusive, and perpetually underestimated. But make no mistake, if you're wearing armor, holding the sword, sitting on her golden throne, or admiring some intricate piece of divine tech, that's all him. While the rest of the gods strut around making chaos, Heristus builds the world they live. And he's the son of Hera, or possibly of Hera alone, depending on which myth you're reading. In one version, she creates him without Zeus just to prove she doesn't need a man to produce a child. But when she sees that he's not perfect, specifically that he has a physical disability, she panics and throws him off Olympus. Yes, his own mother ejects him from the divine clubhouse because he doesn't fit her golden standard. That's the beginning of her fastest story. Rejection, fall pain. He crashes down to earth, or in some versions into the sea, and is either nursed back to health be the sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome, or left to grow up bitter and broken. Depths forging tools, weapons, automatons, and gadgets that would make Da Vinci weep. He becomes a divine tech wizard before the rest of the gods even figure out what a lever does. Eventually, the gods can't ignore his genius. He makes Zeus's thunderbolts. He crafts Achilles' armor. He designs all 12 thrones on Olympus, each one with little hidden mechanisms that sparkle, shift, or snare the sitter, if he's feeling spicy. Hera, of course, eventually tries to welcome him back, especially after he sends her a gift throne that traps her in place. Petty. Absolutely. Justified. Oh, you bet. Her Fastus is a master of function and form. Every myth involving beautiful objects, golden chains, automated serving girls, even Pandora. Yes, that Pandora involves him. And speaking of Pandora, her Fastus is the one who molds her out. Of clay at Zeus's command, giving form to what would become the most infamous jar opener in myth. It's a bittersweet legacy. He creates not only wonders, but also the vessel for mortal suffering. That's her faces in a nutshell. Brilliance always tinged with pain. Oh, let's talk love life. It's complicated. He's married off to Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and desire, in what is perhaps the most mismatched divine pairing imaginable. It's not a love match. It's a peace treaty. Zeus hopes that marrying Aphrodite to someone safe will keep the other gods from fighting over her. It doesn't work. She cheats often, especially with Ares, and her Fistus knows he's the god of craft. After all, if something is happening behind his back, chances are he's already designed a trap to catch it, so he does. The golden net, the public humiliation, the whole divine courtroom sitcom. But after the laughter fades, it's clear her face doesn't get the respect he deserves. Not from his wife, not from the other gods' net, even from his parents. He's always a little outside the circle. It's always the one building the party instead of being invited to it. And yet he keeps going, keeps creating, keeps giving form to chaos. In some myths, he has a relationship with a Goliath, one of the charities, and she's much kinder than Aphrodite. Other stories show him building Lee-like golden assistants, perhaps out of loneliness, perhaps out of artistic obsession. He's the god of making, and he always makes things better than the world has made him. His secured places aren't mountaintop temples or sunny groves. They are volcanoes, underground forges, the hidden places where fire meets earth and something new is born. Lemnos, an island in the Ion, is particularly tied to his worship, as are Mount Etna and other volcanic regions. In these places, people didn't just honor Helios, they understood him. Fire, after all, can destroy, but it can also transform. A quirky fact, Heliostus is one of the few gods who interacts with robots. Yes, robots, mythical Ottomans, but still self-moving. Golden tripods, bronze servants who act like humans, even a giant robot called Talos who patrols the shores of Crete. In a pantheon full of eternal archetypes, Helios feels strangely modern. He's the mythological precursor to sci-fi engineers obsessed with motion mechanics and the fine line between human and machine. Now here's the scholarly debate that lights up academic conferences like a forge. Is Hes's limp symbolic? Some argue. It represents Soshiti's treatment of those with disabilities? How people who don't fit the mold are marginalized even when they're geniuses? Others say it's a metaphor for the paradox of creativity, that the ones who make beauty often carry internal scars. There's no solid answer, but the tension is always there. The god who makes everything but can't fix his own brokenness. Even his name suggests heat and power, though the exact meaning is still fuzzy. Some link him to pre-Greek, possibly Anatolian roots, hinting that he might have been adopted into the Olympian system from an earlier fire-worshipping culture. That would explain his outsider status and his more ancient chthonic flavor. And yet, despite all the myths painting him as awkward, unloved, or just a little too sweaty, Hephaestus endures, not because he's loud, not because he's flashy, but because he builds things that last. Thrones, shields, traps, gods come and go. But his craftsmanship remains functional, beautiful, dangerous, and unshakably. So if you've ever stayed up too late perfecting something that no one will ever quite appreciate, or worked in the background while others took the spotlight, or turned pain into something useful, you've got a little Histus in you, the world might not clap for the forge, but without it, the gods would be naked and unarmed. If Olympus had a delivery service, Hermes would run it, own it, and steal your sandals while you signed for the package. He's the god of travelers, thieves, merchants, messages long, trickery, and basically every form of clever shortcut ever invented. He's fast like Blink, and he's in Egypt fast and always one step ahead, whether he's hurrying sacred cattle or helping Souls find their way to the underworld. Hermes doesn't just move quickly, he thinks. Quickly talks quickly or, and if you're not careful, cons you out of your own belt while quoting poetry. He's the son of Zeus and Maya, a quiet mountain nymph, who probably didn't realize she was giving birth to the most hyperactive being in the known universe. According to myth, Hermes invents the lyre on the day he's born using a tortoise shell, some gut strings, and the kind of confidence only a divine newborn could muster. By nightfall, he's already stolen Apollo's sacred cattle, reversed their hooves to confuse the trail, and composed an alibi. Charming enough to disarm the god of music. And rather than punishing him, Apollo laughs. Then he takes the lyre as a gift, and the tube come weirdly tight. That's Hermes in a nutshell. Causes problems, makes him look like magic, walks away richer. He wears a winged helmet and the winged sandals not because he's trying to be cute, but because he literally cannot sit still. Hermes is the only god who moves freely between all the realms, Olympus, Earth, and the underworld. He serves as the divine messenger, which sounds boring until you realize it gives him access to every god's secrets. He's read all the celestial group chats, knows who's hooking up with whom, and probably has blackmail material on every single Olympian. But he's not malicious. He's just opportunistic. He enjoys bending the rules, but mostly to see if he can. He'll steal, sure, but he'll also return what he stole and improve it. He loves a deal, a joke, a clever turn of phrase, if you have ever found the perfect loophole or smooth-talked your way out of something. That's Hermes, giving you a little wink from beyond the clouds. His staff, the caduceus, is a double snake wand that sometimes gets confused with the rod of Asclepius, which has one snake and actually represents medicine. Hermes's caduceus, by contrast, is more like a universal get-out-of-trouble pass. It calms disputes, guides the dead, and maybe scrambles radio signals if he's bored. It's a symbol of mediation, peace through persuasion, not power. Hermes is the patron of boundaries and crossings, literal ones like roads and borders, but also metaphorical ones between life and death, truth and lie, sacred and profane. He's the god you pray to when you're traveling or transitioning, starting something new, sneaking out of something old. He doesn't judge, he just keeps things moving. He's also the unofficial god of mischief. Think Loki, but with better social skills. He's not cruel, he just likes testing people. In one myth, he disguises himself as an old man and tricks a goddess into laughing. In another, he convinces a herd of cows to walk backward to confuse trackers. He's the kind of guy who'd show up too. A formal event in a toga made of other people's toes, and somehow get a standing ovation. His love life's surprisingly low-key. Hermes has a few flings. He's no monk, but unlike Zeus or Apollo, he's not leaving a trail of cursed exes and tragic demigods in his wake. One of his most famous children is Pan, the goat-legged god of the wild. Pan's mother, a nymph named Dryope, or Penella, depending on the version, apparently had a thing for Hermes' charm. And Realiho doesn't. He's probably the only Olympian you'd want to go to brunch with. And here's a fun little twist. Hermes also becomes associated with alchemy and the occult in later traditions. The mysterious figure Hermes Trismegistus, blend of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, becomes a central figure in Hermeticism, a set of philosophical writings that influenced medieval and Renaissance thought. So while Hermes starts as a mischievous cattle thief, he eventually becomes a symbol of secret knowledge and cosmic balance. That's a pretty solid glow-up. Of course, ancient worship of Hermes wasn't just about philosophy. He had roadside shrines. Hermy little stone pillars often topped with his head, and an extremely visible phallus. Travelers would stop at these to pray for safe passage, leave offerings, or maybe just to do a double take, just in case Hermes was in the mood for a laugh. Now let's dip into the scholarly. Is Hermes an import? Some experts think has. Roots in earlier non-Greek traditions, possibly from the Near East, or even earlier Indo-European trickster gods. Others argue he was always part of the Greek pantheon, but evolved from a rustic pastoral deity into the sleek urban courier of Olympus. Either way, he's clearly a composite part thief, part diplomat, part road trip. DJ. Despite his lightheartedness, Hermes has one very serious job: Psychope. That's the term for someone who guides souls to the afterlife. When you die, in Greek myth, Hermes shows up, not grim, not gory, just calmly helpful, and leads you across the threshold. Doesn't judge your soul or weigh your sins. He just makes sure you get where you're going. It's oddly comforting. Even in death, he's the guy who gets you there. In one piece, maybe with a clever joke along the way. So if you've ever found a shortcut, cracked a code, sweet-talked your way out of parking tickets, or held to opposing ideas in your head at the same time, and somehow made them, Romeo met Hermes. And if you haven't, you will eventually. Because when your journey ends, he's the one who shows up to walk beside you one last time. If Hermes is the god of swift motion and clever mischief, then Dionysus is the god of what happens when you stop pretending to be civilized. He's wine and madness, theater and ecstasy, the scream behind the laughter and the laughter behind the scream.
Dionysus
Doesn't enter a story gently. Arrives like a party at midnight that started as a toast and ended with someone dancing barefoot on a burning table. And the thing is, you're kind of into it. He's the god of wine. Yes, but that barely scratches the surface. Wine is just a gateway. Dionysus is about transformation, about crossing lines, shedding layers, becoming something other than what the polite world tells you to be. He is the thrum of drums in the dark, the dizziness of surrender, the temporary forgetting of self that feels suspiciously like freedom. Heis' origin story, oh, it's a whole thing. In one version, he's the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal woman. Hea always tuned into Zeus's latest side quests, tricks Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his full god form. He does, and she vaporizes. On the spot because the divine truth is just too much. Zeus, mid-disaster, snatches the unborn baby from the ashes and stitches him into his own thigh. A few months later, out pops Dionysus. That's right. He's the only god, born from both a woman and a man, and technically from death and life already. Weird already extra. Raised by nymphs, or sometimes disguised and hidden away by Hermes to keep Hera from destroying him. Dionysus grows up somewhere far from Olympus. His adolescence is spent wandering, learning winemaking, collecting strange followers, shape-shifting, and gathering wisdom that none of the other gods seem to understand. By the time he comes back to claim his seat on Olympus, he's got a crew of Sada's Mahanads, wild Fameladovits, leopards, and a whole new kind of divine energy. The gods don't know what to make of him, but they can't stop him either. Dionysus isn't just about good times and grape juice. His domain includes madness, possession, altered states of consciousness. People worshipped him not just with prayers, but with rituals, orastic dances, trance-like processions, and full-blown theatrical productions, the ancient Greek theater festivals dedicated to Dionysus. Because drama, after all, is another kind of transformation, a shedding of identity to become something else for a little while. His followers, the Maenads, are particularly intense. These women, often regular citizens who ditch their domestic lives for a while, are depicted in myth as frenzied and ecstatic dancing through forests wielding thyrsus, a staff topped with pine cones, and sometimes tearing wild animals limb from limb in a state of divine madness. Were these literal orgies of chaos, or symbolic representations of feminine release in a repressive culture? Scholars are still arguing, but either way the message is clear. Dionysus doesn't ask you to stay within the lines. He asks if those lines ever made sense in the first place, and yet he's not malevolent. He can be terrifying, yes, when denied, when mocked. He's not cruel for fun. He offers release. He offers freedom. But like all things with power, that freedom comes with risk. Accept him, and you may laugh like never before. Reject him and things get messy. Ask Pentheus, the king of thieves. Whence tries to ban Dionysus's worship and spy on the women's rituals. Dionysus tricks him into dressing like a woman and sneaking into the woods. There, in a frenzy, the Maenads mistake him for a lion and tear him apart, including his own mother. No, really, this is not your safe space god. This is your teardown, though. Safe space god. God. And then there's Dionysus's aesthetic, completely unmatched. He rides in chariots pulled by panthers crowned in ivy, cloaked in wine-stained robes. His face is soft, almost androgynous, framed in curls. He blurs all boundaries, gender sanity, power. He's not Apollo's golden clarity. He's the beautiful blur of what happens after the third drink. But he's not sloppy. That's the trap. Dionysus isn't drunkenness. He's the god of being intoxicated well. It's the art of letting go with precision, of falling apart in style. He's also the god of rebirth. In old Orphic traditions, Dionysus is linked with Zagreus, a mysterious chthonic version of himself. Is dispindered by titans and reborn, carrying themes of death and resurrection that echo across religious systems. There's something deeply ancient in Dionysus, core idea that to be transformed, one must first be undone. That joy and pain, creation and destruction, are two sides of the same divine coin. Here's a quirky note. He's the only Olympian to grant full divine status to a mortal woman he loved, Ariadne. After she helps Theseus defeat the Minotaur and gets abandoned on Anisland, thanks hero, Dionysus finds her, marries her, and lifts her to the stars as a constellation. He doesn't ghost, he exalts. Because when Dionysus loves you, it's Alan. And while the rest of the gods often keep their distance from mortals, Dionysus dives right in. He shows up to parties. He blesses the harvest. He lets the theater masks slip. He walks among us, not like a ruler, but like that friend who buys you. A drink pulls you into the dance floor and says, forget your name for a while. You're more than that. As for scholarly debates, plenty. Was Dionysus a late addition to the pantheon? Did he come from Thrace? Or was he a fusion of older Near Eastern fertility gods? His myths feel layered like stories built on older stories, some dark, some joyful, all. Pulsing with the need to break the world open and drink from what spills out. So if you've ever laughed until you cried, or danced until you forgot what was hurting, or stared at the moon and felt it staring back, you've heard Dionysus, not the chaos, but the grace inside it. And if he ever shows up at your door wearing ivy and smelling like wine and wildfire, don't resist. Just go. He only asks that you leave your name behind. Now let's take a step back from the divine drama, the cosmic affairs, the sword slinging, and wine sloshing, and light a small fire in a quiet hearth. Because there's one goddess who doesn't shout, doesn't smite, doesn't flirt or fight, but still holds the core of Olympus together. Her name is Hestia. And if you've never heard much about her, that's sort of the point. She's the goddess of the hearth, the home, and domestic harmony. Not flashy, not scandalous, just essential. While the other gods were out starting wars or launching seductions that would topple cities, Hestia was keeping the fire going always. She's the firstborn child of Cronus and Rhea, and ironically the first to be swallowed by her dad when he tried to dodge his overthrow prophecy, but she's also the last to be regurgitated when Zeus frees his siblings. So technically she's both the oldest and youngest Olympian, which feels about right for a goddess who bends time around her in quiet loops of warmth and patience. Hestia's presence isn't towering or glowing. She doesn't descend from the sky or ride animals into battle. Instead, she's the flame in the middle of every house, every meal cooked, every story told by firelight, every simple moment of peace. Those are hers. In ancient Greece, every home had a hearth dedicated to her. Every city-state had a public hearth in her honor. When new colonies were founded, settlers carried a flame from Hestia's sacred fire to light the new one. She was literally the spiritual continuity between old and new, and the goddess of keeping things going, not by force, but by constancy. Her personality, as told through myth, is gentle, serene. There are no epic tantrums, no exiles, no divine lovers or vengeful plots. She's a virgin goddess, not because she's icy or disinterested, because she chose simplicity over spectacle. When both Apollo and Poseidon pursued her, two of the flashiest bachelors in the divine dating pool, she turned them down nicely, politely, and with enough conviction that Zeus eventually granted her a rare honor, perpetual virginity, and the first portion of every sacrificial offering. I'll let that sink in. While the rest of the Olympians are constantly jostling for power and attention, Hestia calmly receives the first offering at every single feast. She doesn't ask, she doesn't demand, she's just given it out of respect. of someone who says, "No worries, I'm good," and somehow becomes the person everyone actually trusts. There's power in being non-threatening. Hestia has mastered it. One of the few stories that shows her making a real move is about leaving. That's right. At some point, depending on the version, Hestia voluntarily steps down from her seat as one of the 12 Olympians to make room for Dionysus. Not because she was pushed out, not because she lost relevance, but because she saw what the pantheon needed and chose peace over position. That's the ultimate flex. Being so secure in your power that you don't need the throne to prove anything. A quirky little fact. Hestia has almost no temples in the traditional sense. She doesn't need grand marble structures or mountaintop sanctuaries. Her temple is wherever a flame burns with care. A cook fire, a city's central hearth, a small flickering candle in a dark room. In Delphic tradition, the eternal flame in her honor was never allowed to go out. She was sacred through practice, not display. And while most Olympians tend to leave trails of trauma in their wake, looking at you, Zeus, Hestia doesn't. There are no mortals struck by her wrath. No tragic love affairs or monstrous offspring. She's just there, still enduring. Some ancient texts barely mention her, which isn't neglect. It's consistency. She's the background hum. The warmth and the cold, the goddess people forgot to worry about, because she never gave them a reason to. But don't mistake quiet for weakness. In a pantheon defined by chaos and conflict, Hestia holds a kind of divine gravity. Every Olympian can extol in brilliance, but without her flame, there's no home to return to. She is the goddess of return, of grounding, of beginning and ending. Every offering starts with her. Every flame that lights a torch, a meal, a sacred vow begins with her name. And here's a bit of scholarly debate that adds an intriguing wrinkle. Was Hestia once the most important goddess of all? Some researchers argue that in the earlier stages of Greek religious practice, she may have represented the center of all things, cosmic and domestic. Over time, as mythology shifted toward action-packed tales of war, conquest, and conquest disguised as love, the quieter deities got overshadowed. But in local rural traditions, she remained beloved. Not in the drama of epic poems, but in the doubly prayers of families, the sacrifices made before cooking dinner. The whispered thanks as a fire sparked to life on a cold morning. Her name literally means hearth, your fireplace. There's no ambiguity, no metaphor, and she is what she symbolizes. And that kind of clarity is rare among gods who constantly shapeshift, bicker, and seduce each other's lovers. Hestia never pretends to be anything other than herself. She doesn't need to. If you have ever sat with someone in comfortable silence, or made a meal for people you care about, or lit a candle just to feel a little less alone, you've already honored Hestia. No dramatic rituals, no lightning bolts required. Just a steady flame, a steady heart. And if the world ever seems too loud, too chaotic, too obsessed with winning and showing off and being heard, remember that somewhere unseen and still Hestia's fire is burning, waiting for you to come home. Sometimes the most powerful stories don't. Roar, they whisper. And among the whisperers, Nomoth echoes quite like Persephone's. She's the goddess of spring queen of the underworld and the living embodiment of contradiction. She is light and shadow, innocence and agency, life and death, all braided together in one complicated divine crown of flowers and ashes. If Hades is the stillness of the grave, Persephone is the moment the first green shoot breaks through it. Tale begins in a field, a meadow, actually flowers everywhere. She's picking them young and radiant, the kind of springtime beauty that makes birds sing out of key. Then the earth splits open, literally. Cades rises in his chariot pulled by nightmare. Horses, and depending on which version of the myth you prefer, abducts her, seduces her, or carries her off with divine inevitability. It's not a rescue. It's not quite a kidnapping. It's something in between. That ambiguous middle ground is where Persephone always lives. When Diada, her mother, realizes her daughter is missing, the world stops. Crops wither, animals starve mortals. Pray and Gettinly frost in return. Zeus, seeing that humanity might die out and take his temples with it, finally sends Hermes to retrieve Persephone. Hades, of course, agrees to let her go, but not before she eats a few pomegranate seeds. Just enough to bind her to the underworld forever, a contract hidden inside a piece of fruit. The compromise is struck. Persephone spends part of the year above with her mother and part below with her husband. Her ascent marks spring, her descent marks autumn, and all of nature bends to her coming-in's ongoings. She becomes the hinge between the living and the dead, the pivot of the seasonal wheel. But don't mistake her for a passive pawn in someone else's. Drama. Over time, Persephone evolves. In earlier myths, she's Kor the maiden, a delicate symbol of fertility. But in later traditions, she's formidable. She rules the underworld beside Hades, not behind him. She's not just the girl who was taken. She's the queen who stays, who holds the keys, who judges the dead, and walks the asphodel fields with steady grace. And when you really look at it, Persephone's story isn't about loss, it's about transformation. The descent into darkness and the climb back into the light. The cycle of becoming someone else because the world cracked open and pulled you down with it. She doesn't return from the underworld, the same girl who left that meadow. She comes back with shadows in her eyes and a crown that wasn't given. Was earned. She embodies liminality, the space in between things. Between maiden and queen, between daughter and sovereign, between innocence and experience. Her presence is felt most in the threshold moments. The first frost, the first bloom, the smell of dirt warming in spring. She reminds us that growth doesn't always look like light. Sometimes it looks like roots pushing through hard soil. A quirky footnote. In some Orphic versions of the myth, Persephone isn't just the daughter of Dida. She's the mother of Zagreus as a child with Zeus, who becomes a dying and rising god figure associated with Dionysus. It's a complicated, tangled branch of mythology involving dismemberment, reincarnation, and a divine baby who gets eaten by titans. But it positions Persephone as more than a seasonal goddess. She becomes central to the mysteries of life and death, birth and rebirth. That's a lot of narrative for someone often reduced to a flower-picking teen. And there are cults, big ones. The Eleusinian mysteries, the most sacred rites in ancient Greece, center on Diada and Persephone. These rituals promised secret knowledge about the afterlife and a better fate after death. What exactly happened during the ceremonies? No one really knows. Initiates were sworn to secrecy, and somehow that oath held for centuries. But scholars believe the core message was hope. That life leads to death, and death back to life again. That Persephone has walked the path ahead of you, and will be there when your own descent begins. Of course, not everyone agrees on the tone of her myth. Some see her story as a trauma narrative, abduction, loss of agency, a forced marriage spun into something more palatable. Others argue that Persephone wields more power than we give her credit for, that maybe she chose to eat the seeds, that maybe she found something in the darkness that she couldn't in the light. Her story has been interpreted through feminist lenses, psychoanalytical theory, and agricultural metaphors. She is Persephone, the victim Persephone, the goddess Persephone, the threshold. The only thing no one calls her is simple, and that's the brilliance of her myth. It holds space for change. She's not stuck in one shape. She can be both the girl who danced in fields and the woman who sits beside the god of death and commands. Respect. In a pantheon full of extremes, Persephone contains contradictions. That's her superpower. Even today, her story lingers in the cultural psyche. You see her in the spring blooms and the autumn leaves, in every story of coming of age, and every person who has had to navigate a before and an after. If you have ever felt like your soul has lived two separate lives, one in the sun, one in the shadows, Persephone understands. She's not just a myth, she's a cycle, and she's still moving. If love is chaotic, irrational, and full of bad decisions wrapped in butterflies, then Oz is the god, quietly smiling in the background, bow drawn, arrow ready. You might know him by his Roman alias Cupid, the chubby baby, and Valentine's Day cards, but the original Greek version, much edgier, more dangerous. OS isn't just love. to compulsion, that sudden chest tightening, what am I even doing, urge that makes you call your ex, or write poetry you'll regret in the morning. And behind all that drama, it's a grinning like a kid who just set off fireworks in your heart and walked away whistling. In the earliest myths, OS is primordial, born from chaos itself, or maybe from Nyx the night, depending on which ancient poet you ask. He wasn't a cute winged cherub. He was a cosmic force, the glue that made the first atoms fall in love and the universe spiral into being. This version of Eros is awe-inspiring and a little terrifying. Imagine desire not as a feeling but as a law of nature. Force is real and unstoppable as gravity. That's a one, no. Later myths soften him up. He becomes the son of Aphrodite. Sometimes by Ares, sometimes not, depending on who was storytelling and how much wine they'd had. In these versions, he's still mischievous, still powerful, but now, he's embodied as a young man with wings of bow and a very skewed sense of personal boundaries. One golden arrow can make someone fall helplessly in love. A lead one just as quickly can make them turn cold. Love and indifference, heartbreak and bliss, delivered in matching quivers. And then we get to the myth of OS and Psyche. The romantic roller coaster of Greek mythology, full of secrets, jealousy, talking to trust issues galore, a psychomortal. So beautiful, she starts drawing worship away from Aphrodite herself. Gets cursed by the goddess of love, Huzans, OS, to make her fall in love with something monstrous. But when OS sees her, he slips. He falls in love, and that's when things get delightfully messy. Oz hides Psyche away in a palace, where he visits her only at night and tells her never to look at him. She's lonely, but falls for him anyway, until her sisters plant doubt in her mind. She lights a lamp one night while he sleeps and sees him in all his divine beauty. But a drop of hot oil falls from the lamp and wakes him. He flees heartbroken, and she's left alone. Quethy heartbreak montage. Psyche, undeterred, begins a series of impossible tasks: carrying water from the river Styx, sorting grains overnight, descending into the underworld to win him back. She completes them all. Eventually, even the gods take pity. Zeus himself grants her immortality, and she and Eros are reunited. Soul and desire finally together, literally because Psyche means soul. Their daughter Hadon becomes the goddess of pleasure. Can't make this stuff up, unless you're the Greeks. This myth hits different from most of the others in the pantheon. It's not about conquest or tragedy. It's about love as a journey, about the soul enduring trials to unite with desire. It's messy, it's unfair, it's beautiful, and very human. House, who spends so much time messing with others' hearts, finally gets caught in his own net. And when he does, he becomes something more than a trickster. He becomes vulnerable. But don't be fooled, else never fully retires. He still lurks at the edges of myths, shooting a pharaohs when bored, nudging heroes into dumb crushes, or queens into political disasters. He's love at first sight, yes, but also lust without logic, obsession without outcome, longing that won't quit. If Aphrodite is the slow burn of beauty, Os is the spark that catches your sleeve on fire. A quirky little sidebar. In some philosophical texts, particularly in Plato's Symposium, Os gets a full rebranding. He's described as a daemon, a spirit between gods and mortals, constantly yearning and pushing us to seek beauty, wisdom, and connection. Not just carnal love, but the hunger to transcend ourselves, which is basically Plato's way of saying OS is trying to help you become your best self via emotional chaos. Scholars have argued for ages over what Eros really represents. Is he simply erotic desire, a symbol of divine longing, a metaphor for creativity, the way attraction fuels poetry and art and catastrophic romantic decisions? Or is he just what happens when you mix hormones with the potoxul of an ancient Mediterranean culture? The truth is, OS is all of it. He's whatever happens when your chest aches and your brain stops working. He's the god of bad timing. Great. Kisses and songs you can't listen to without thinking of that one person you don't worship. You survive him. You write letters you don't send. You stare at photos. You walk by someone's house accidentally. Text just checking in. And maybe once or twice it works. You fall in love. You light the lamp. You're burned. keep going, because that's what Psyche did. And Noah, struck by his own arrow, learned to love in return. So next time your heart's racing for no reason or you feel yourself slipping into something you know is dangerous but feels so right, don't curse it too much. It might just be OS out there in the cosmos reminding you that real love is always a little foolish, that sometimes the biggest myth is thinking you're immune. In the symphony of Olympus, where gods clash and thunder rumbles and divine egos swell larger than Mount Etna, there's a quieter force humming beneath it all. A chorus of inspiration, laughter, and that strange moment when lightning strikes your brain. With an idea so good it makes your toes curl. Enter the Muses.
9 sisters,
9 goddesses who never demand worship but somehow make everything worth remembering. If you have ever written something that felt guided, painted something that painted you back, or sung a tune that cracked your soul open, you've heard them, or maybe they've borrowed you for a moment. The Muses are the daughters of Zeus and Neosone, the tightness of the memory, which makes perfect sense. Creativity and memory, imagination, and the past together birthing inspiration. According to legend, Zeus slept with Neosone for 9 consecutive nights. Classic Zeus, and each night produced 1 muse. That's the math of myth. Apparently, passion plus memory * 9 equals divine inspiration in 9 flavors. Their names: Calliope Ipicotry, Clio History, Rado, Love Poetry, Uter Music, Melpomene Tragedy, Polyhymnia Hymns, Terpsor Dance, Thalia Comedy, and Urania Astronomy. Yes, even the stars needed a muse. Each sister has her own domain, her own mood, her own aesthetic. Whether it's Clio clutching scrolls, Melpomene holding a mask of sorrow, or Terp mid-twirl like she's auditioning for an eternal ballet, together they form the divine support staff for human culture. Artists, poets, musicians, and orators would invoke Themises before beginning anything serious. Even Homer opens the Iliad with Sing Muse, as if he knows he's just the mouthpiece. You don't create in a vacuum. The Muses are the wind behind the sail, the breath behind the voice, the divine nudge that turns blank pages into something that echoes. But they're not just muses in the modern passive sense, lounging in gog robes waiting for painters to sketch them. These goddesses are active, powerful, capable of uplifting or abandoning. When they favor you, it feels like your words write themselves. When they leave, it's like staring at an empty stage in your brain waiting for actors who never arrive. They were originally worshipped on Mount Helic and later on Mount Parnacus sacred. Peaks where springs of inspiration literally bubbled from the earth. The spring of Hippocrene, said to be created by a stomp of Pegasus's hoof, was sacred to them. Drink from it, and your tongue might be lit with divine fire, or you might just wander around compassing awkward limericks. That's the gamble, quirky fact. In some older traditions, there weren't 9 muses. There were 3 or sometimes just 1. The idea of 9 solidified later, possibly under the influence of the structured arts of classical Greece, when people really liked putting labels on things. Scholars still debate whether the number 9 was symbolic or just a poetic way to cover all creative bases. Either way, the final lineup stuck, and today they're the original girl group of inspiration. And while they don't often feature in headline, myths no wars started in their name, no jealous lovers turned into swans, they hover in the margins of almost every story. They were said to be present at Apollo's concerts, at feasts on Olympus, at mortal competitions of wit and song. Apollo himself is often called their leader. Together they brought harmony to Olympus's otherwise messy playlist. Let's not forget the story of the Peers. 9 mortal sisters who thought they could outsing the Muses. Spoiler, they couldn't. The Muses let them perform, politely listened, then turned them into magpies for their arrogance. A little harsh maybe, but there's a clear message. Don't confuse talent with divinity. Inspiration isn't something you own. It's something you borrow, and only if you ask nicely. But the Muses aren't all about punishment. They've got the rare distinction of being God's people liked. Genuinely, they weren't feared like Chorus or bargained with like Poseidon. They were welcomed. Artists didn't just pray to them. They talked to them, wrote for them, gave them credit. There's something charming about that gods who don't demand altars, just acknowledgement. Just a breath of gratitude before your next masterpiece. Philosophers got obsessed with them too. Plato, ever the overthinker, described the muses not just as sources of beauty, but as the channel through which a divine truth reaches the soul. He even suggested that madness from the muses, a kind of holy frenzy, was the best kind. The kind that produced prophets, lovers, and poets. Basically, if you're babbling nonsense but it feels transcendent, blame the muses. Preferably anemic pentameter. And that's the thing. The muses blur the line between sanity and inspiration. You don't always know when they've arrived. They don't announce themselves. But you'll know when they're gone. They are flow. They are clarity. They are the quiet click when everything suddenly makes sense. They don't shout, they hum. And if you listen, you might just catch the tune. They real? Doesn't matter. They've been real enough for thousands of years to every person who ever stared at a blank page and waited. They've been whispered to in studios, summoned in classrooms, invoked on stages, and in basement with guitars. And bad lighting. They've danced behind lovers who became poems and stood at the edges of canvases where color didn't know what it wanted to be. So if you're stuck, creative elaprazed, and 3 cups of coffee and without a single useful sentence, maybe pause, light a candle, take a breath, whisper to the muses. They might just be listening or laughing or turning you into a magpie. Either way, you'll know you tried. If the Olympian gods were a workplace, which honestly they kind of are, their nemesis is the one quietly keeping the receipts. You won't see her at the center of parties or tangled up in scandalous love triangles or throwing thunderbolts. No nemesis is behind Thesines, wearing something simple but terrifyingly. Tailored, watching and waiting for you to get exactly what you deserve. She's the goddess of retribution. Balance her in cosmic justice. If someone flies too close to the sun, Nemesis is the one who reminds them where the ground is. Her name says it all. Nemesis comes from the Greek naiin, meaning to give what is due. And she's not just about punishment. She's about proportion. When someone has too much of power, wealth, pride, luck, she steps in to restore equilibrium. She doesn't hate happiness. She hates hubris. It's a kind of pride that flips the bird to the gods and assumes the world will just keep handing over trophies. That's when Nemesis puts on her quiet smile, cracks her knuckles, and opens a very old ledger. Unlike the flashier deities, Nemesis doesn't appear in tons of dramatic myths, but she's always present, like gravity or that look your mom gives. You when you've just crossed the line and don't know it yet. She doesn't act out of rage or jealousy. She acts with cool calculation. When she moves, the consequences feel eerily tailored to the offender. It's not about wrath, it's about symmetry. Take the story of Narcissus. It's the guy who makes every mirror selfie in history look modest. Was beautiful and knew it. Scorned everyone who dared love him. Eventually, one of the people he rejected, in some versions it's the nympho, prays for justice. Nemesis hears. She leads Narcissus to a pool where he falls in love with his own reflection and wastes away staring at it. A classic, clean and so perfectly. On brand, it practically has her signature at the bottom. Or consider anyone in Greek myth who gets a little too loud about how great they are. Kings who brag about being better than the gods. Queens who boast about their flawless kids. The warriors who claim immortality before the final battle. Spoiler, they all get a visit from Nemesis. Sometimes in the form of a lost battle, sometimes a storm. Sometimes a good old-fashioned Edful from grace so odd you can hear the thud echo for centuries. Her appearance varies in ancient art and literature, but she's often portrayed with wings, a sword, a balanced scale, and sometimes a wheel symbolizing how fortune turns on while Sir, and how no position on top is ever permanent. She might carry a measuring rod, a bridle, to rein in excess, or a scourge, just light accessories for divine bookkeeping. Worship of Nemesis wasn't wild or frenzied. It was serious, respectful. Her most famous temple was at Rhymnoa's northeast of Athens. The cult statue there crafted by the sculptor Agros was made from marble, originally intended for a Persian victory monument. An ironic twist Nemesis herself probably would have approved of. Visitors came to honor her not to ask for blessings, but to acknowledge limits. You didn't ask her for more. You asked her to keep things fair. And here's the thing, in a culture Obsessed with balance and moderation, Nemesis wasn't feared. She was necessary. The Greeks had a word for what she counters: hubris, excessive pride or arrogance. They believed that whenever hubris went unchecked, it created an imbalance in the world. Nemesis was the red thread stitching the tear back up. She was the nonsense force reminding even kings and heroes that, yes, you're very shiny and important, but guess what? You bleed like everyone else. A quirky aside. In later traditions, especially as Greek myths blended with Roman and other cultures, Nemesis started to take on some of the functions of Fortuna, the goddess of luck, but with a twist. Whereas Fortuna might roll the dice and walk away, Nemesis watches where they land. She's not randomness. She's the pattern beneath the chaos, the echo of your own choices looping back toward you like a divine boomerang. Scholars sometimes debate whether Nemesis was ever truly Olympian, as in part of the 12. Most say no. She's more of a primordial force, or a conceptual goddess like Thy's divine law or Dyke justice. But her influence was massive, and her presence undeniable, especially in tragedies and epics where the moment of downfall, the sudden twist where a hero realizes they've gone too far, is always laced with her shadow. She's not loud, but her footsteps are unmistakable. And maybe that's what makes her so unsettling. She's the god you don't see coming. She doesn't warn you, doesn't give long speeches or send omens in the sky. She just shows up when the scale tips too far. It's not to hurt you, but to-bring things back into balance. If that balance includes your public humiliation or literal ruin, well, maybe you shouldn't have declared yourself more beautiful than Aphrodite. So if you've ever watched someone rise a little too quickly, talk a little too loudly, and then crash so spectacularly you actually winced, that's Nemesis. Maybe you've even met her yourself. A humbling moment, a silent correction, the realization that the universe does keep score, even if it takes its sweet time. She doesn't seek revenge, she restores. And in a world full of clout chasers, scene stealers, and rule breakers, maybe that's exactly the kind of goddess we still need. Quiet, unsmiling, and always, always accurate. If divine vengeance has a face, then divine victory wears sneakers or wings or both. Meet Nike, the goddess of victory. Adrenaline in goddess form, and quite possibly the originator of winning, isn't everything. It's the only thing. She doesn't make headlines like the Olympian listers. She doesn't get tangled in messy love triangles or start wars over golden apples. But when the dust settles on any battlefield, literal or metaphorical, Nike is the one. Standing with a laurel in one hand and your broken excuses in the other. Her name literally means victory. And unlike most gods who dabble in metaphors, Nike doesn't represent it. She is it. Not just military victory either, though that's definitely her bread and butter. She's also present at athletic competition's chariot, races, poetry contests, and even legal disputes where a well-delivered speech is the sharpest weapon in the room. Wherever there's a winner, Nike's there, whispering confidence into their ears, or maybe just handing them a gold medal and a smug little nod. Nike isn't a standalone headliner in the pantheon, but she's everywhere in the background. Think of her as the ultimate hype woman to Zeus Athena, and any hero with an agenda, and the ambition to back it up. She often appears flanking Athena in art and myth, which makes sense. Wisdom and victory go hand in hand. You don't win just by force. You win with timing, insight, and the ability to keep your ego from making dumb decisions. Nike helps with that, probably while running laps around everyone else. And she's fast like Hermes level fast, but without the tendency to steal your wallet. In sculpture and pottery, she's usually shown flying, sometimes landing, sometimes mid-stride. Like she's just now arriving with news that, yes, you crushed it. In fact, the Greeks often depicted her as a winged figure in motion because victory never sits still. It runs, it sources, it rushes in like a drine-in before the final play. One of her most famous appearances is on the Nike of Samothrace statue, possibly the most dramatic marble embodiment of movement in human history. Wings spread, robes whipping back like she just landed from a divine sprint. She stands on the prow of a ship. Her face is missing Sherbat, that somehow makes her even more powerful. She doesn't need a face. She is the moment. If you've ever stood in front of that statue in the loo, you felt it. It's weird silent momentum that makes you want to win something, anything. Nike is the daughter of the Titan Palace and the river goddess Styx, and she fought on the side of the Olympians in the war against the Titans. That loyalty earned her a place close to Zeus, who kept her by his throne as a kind of divine scoreboard. If Zeus was the CEO of Olympus, Nike was the head of performance. Metrics delivering real-time updates on who was ahead and who was losing divine credibility. And while Nike didn't have as many individual myths or temples dedicated to her alone, she was everywhere. Her presence was woven into the culture. Victors in the Olympic Games made sacrifices to her. Military commanders dedicated statues and shrines in her name after conquests. Even coins bore her image flying or striding laurels in hand wings half, spread like she weighs about to bounce off the currency itself. If you wanted to be remembered, you made sure Nike was part of your victory lap. Now, let's take a quick detour into modern territory. Yes, that Nike, the brand, the swoosh, is meant to evoke the motion of her wings, the name a direct lift from the goddess. It's not just a clever marketing move, it's deeply symbolic. Because when you lace up those sneakers, whether you're heading into a marathon or just trying to outrun your own procrastination, channeling the spirit of a goddess whose whole identity is triumph through effort. But Nike doesn't guarantee success. That's where people get it twisted. She doesn't show up before the fight and promise glory. She waits, watches, and if you earn it, earn it. But she's there winging in like a finishing bell. Her presence is earned, not gifted. She's not about privilege or luck. She's about execution. If you quit halfway, she doesn't come. If you boast too early, she backs away. But if you pish sweat, dig deep, and make it happen, then she appears. Cool and composer is like she was there. All along, here's a little-known fact. The Temple of Athena Nike on the Acropolis of Athens isn't just about Athena. It's about this dynamic duo. Athena brings strategy. Nike delivers the win. The temple, small but elegant, looks out over the battlefield, like it's waiting for history to prove it right. Inside, friezes show Nike adjusting her sandal, quiet human gesture in the middle Aphrodite symbolism. Even goddesses have to tie their shoes before changing the world. Scholars sometimes debate whether Nike was ever a major goddess on her own, or always an extension of Athena. Was she a personality, a principle, or a personified ideal? Maybe all three. O3. This isn't always about clear categories. In many ways, Nike feels like an energy more than a character, a divine adrenaline rush that blesses the moment everything aligns. But she does have agency. In some rare texts, she even turns down unworthy victories. She chooses her champions, and that's the part people forget. She's not just handing out ribbons to whoever shows up. She's watching to see who finishes, who earns the celebration, who deserves the roar of the crowd and the laurel on their brow. So if you've ever crossed a finish line no one else knew you were racing toward or stood breathless at the top of something you clawed your way up, Nike was there. She might not have said anything, might not have thrown confetti, but she smiled and handed you a quiet little trophy, invisible to everyone else, but weighty as gold. She doesn't come in loud. She doesn't need thunder or wreaths or wing sandals. Tiki just walks in casually, spinning a wheel that could make or break. Ewan watches as your life goes sideways or skyward or somewhere weird in between. Tiki is the goddess of fortune, chance, fate's favorite intern, or maybe it's puppet master. She's the reason you trip right before a standing ovation or find. $20 in a coat Yo haven't worn since last winter. With Tiki, it's not about justice. It's not about deserving. It's about the cosmic coin flip, and she always carries the coin. In the golden age of the Olympians, Tiki isn't quite center stage. She doesn't sit on one of the famous 12 thrones. But as Greek society becomes more chaotic, empires rising and falling, cities booming and burning, Tiki gets her spotlight. Because when humans feel out of control, they start paying attention to the goddess who's been quietly steering the chaos from the back row with a half smile and a tilted crown. She's usually depicted holding a cornucopia in one hand, spilling out random blessings, gold coins, fruit riches, and a rudder in the other, guiding the fates of mortals like she's steering a ship that doesn't always know where it's headed. Sometimes she stands on a ball or a wheel, just to hammer home how shaky the whole business of existence really is. Stability, try again. Predictability, hilarious. With Take, it's all about surprise. Her most iconic representations come from the Hellenistic period, when individual cities started to adopt her as their patroness, their taikapus. You'll find statues of her wearing city walls as a crown, literally, not metaphorically. Fortified stone crowns with gates and towers like she just ripped them off the skyline and perched them on her head. Why? Because the well-being of entire city-states was believed to hinge on her whim. You could build the strongest navy, the finest. Temple's the best olive oil export game in the Ion, and still lose it all because Taiki decided to yawn and look the other way. One of her more subtle but deeply unsettling symbols is the blindfold. Not always present, but implied. It's not because she can't see, it's because she doesn't need to. Fortune isn't about fairness. She'll hand a kingdom to a fool and hand a hangale to a philosopher just to see what happens. She's the original let's roll the dice and find out energy. It is deeply disorienting. It's also deeply relatable. Tyr isn't all about blessings either. Her shadow twin, occasionally listed as Nemesis, sometimes Fortuna's darker aspect in Roman myth, shows up to balance the scales when Tiki tips too far in one direction. It's not that Taki wants to create imbalance, it's just that balance isn't her job. She gives, she takes sometimes, both at once. The rest is someone else's mess to clean up. Now here's a fun little side story that tells you exactly who you're dealing with. The story of Polycrates, a ruler of Samos. He was so absurdly lucky military victories, wealth allies, that even his enemies were freaked out. His friend Ames Pharaoh of Egypt told him, dude, the gods don't like that kind of luck. Do something to ruin it, or they'll do it for you. So Polycrates tosses his most prized ring into the sea. Smart move, right? Except days later, a fisherman catches a huge fish, and inside its stomach is the ring. Taiki just boomeranged his bad luck rejection right back at him. Later, he gets betrayed and crucified. The lesson: you can't outmaneuver fortune, especially when she has a sense of humor. Quirky fact: Taiki eventually became so popular that even the Romans gave her a glow-up as Fortuna, and she thrived. The cult of Fortuna expanded rapidly. Shrines, altars, statues, you name it. Romans worshipped her in several aspects. Fortuna Redux for safe returns. Fortuna Virilis for romantic luck. Fortuna Malia Breeze for married women. There was a Fortuna for literally every category of possible life turbulence. It was like divine insurance with zero guarantees. Scholars love to chew on Taik because she reflects this shift in ancient religious thought from a tight rule-based cosmos where virtue was rewarded and hubris punished to a looser, more chaotic universe. In earlier myths, gods respond to mortal choices. But with Taik, the universe just happens to you. No moral filter, no long speeches, just the weird, arbitrary role of existence. It's deeply existential and a little terrifying, also kind of modern. Some think Tiki's rise mirrors the increasing unpredictability of the real world for the Greeks and later the Romans, especially as empires got too big to understand and wars started involving entire regions instead of city-states. When the world gets messy, capricious, and confusing people, stop asking what did I do wrong and start asking what did she roll today. Tiki became the cosmic answer to why is everything on fire and why am I winning while my neighbor gets struck by a meteor. Still, Tika's presence isn't always cruel. Sometimes she surprises you with a break just when you've given up. Lucky. Meeting a sudden windfall, a moment where the path clears and you don't even know why. That's her too. The nudge, the twist, the open door you didn't see coming. So if you're ever sitting at a crossroads weighing your options, feeling like none of them make sense, but still something pushes you forward, it might be Tiki turning Thuil. Whether it lands in your favor, that's another story. Because with her, it's never about what you've earned. It's about where the ball logger lands and how you walk once it does. Imagine a boardroom at the top of the world. Golden thrones, never-ending nectar, immortal egos, slouched in glimmering seats. This is Olympus. Sure, but beneath the divine dazzle, it's also just office politics. Petty rivalries, side glances, power moves disguised as prophecies. The Olympian, gods are just celestial beings. They're co-workers in an eternal company with zero turnover and a major HR problem. And the meeting's absolute chaos. At first glance, the hierarchy seems simple. Zeus on top everyone else in some kind of star-powered pecking order, but it's never just about titles. It's about influence. Who shows up to the table? Who actually gets listened to? Who can throw a tantrum that sends ripples through reality and still get invited to next week's ambrosia tasting? Welcome to the Olympian inner circle, where the seating chart is written in thunder, but the alliances change with the wind. Zeus, obviously, acts like the CEO. Technically in charge, he throws the weight of authority around making declarations, launching divine punishments and pretending he's the moral compass when really he's just trying to cover up. His latest escapade involving a swan and someone else's spouse. He holds the thunderbolt, sure, but half the time he is just trying to keep the rest of the board from walking out or starting a mutiny. Hera, his queen, might not hold the lightning, but she controls the long game. She remembers everything. And her strategic grudge holding makes her terrifying in every debate. She doesn't yell, she waits. And when she speaks, even the loudest gods suddenly remember they left something cooking on Olympus's metaphorical stove. Then there's Athena, the silent power in the room. She doesn't grandstand, she calculates. She listens with those cool owl eyes. Waits for everyone to dig their own grave with words, and then drops one sentence that shuts the whole thing down. If Zeus is the king and here's the queen, Athena is the advisor they both hate to admit they need. Apollo brings charisma, music, and way too many unsolicited opinions. He'll interrupt a meeting just to quote a poem he wrote the night before. Artemis, she's often not even there, off in the woods avoiding group projects. But when she does attend, she's ice-cold and blunted enough to make Ares sit down and reconsider his choices. Speaking of Ares, he's the classic middle manager who thinks he's more important than he is. Always itching, gushing for a fight, always acting like Olympus needs more bloodshed, not less. Most of the time, the others just let him talk until he tires himself out or storms off to punch a mountain. Nobody takes his suggestions seriously unless they involve beating something with a club. Aphrodite wields a different kind of influence. She doesn't need to raise her voice. She raises eyebrows. She knows exactly who's been flirting with who, which demigods are causing problems down on Earth, and how to drop the kind of subtle shade that sparks a god-level scandal. She might act like she's above politics, but don't let the fluttery robe fool you. Aphrodite plays the game. She just does it with perfume and passive aggression. Hephaestus, he's the underpaid engineer in the corner. He designs all the tools everyone else uses, shows up to every meeting with practical solutions, and gets interrupted constantly. Nobody listens to him unless something breaks. When that happens, they beg for his help like he hasn't been right there all along. Hermes, of course, never stays in one seat. He's zipping between Olympus and Earth, delivering messages, stirring up gossip, and occasionally forging signatures on divine memos. He's in every room, hears every whisper. And if you think he's not reporting back to both Zeus and Hades, depending on what pays better, you haven't been paying attention. Hestia sits quietly, rarely speaking, just tending the hearth, even in meetings. She's not involved in the squabbling, but her presence makes the room feel like it won't tear itself apart. Everyone forgets she's there until she's not, and suddenly the air gets colder and the arguments sharper. She doesn't need power plays. She is stability. Dionysus often arrives late, possibly tipsy, but when he talks, people listen mostly because they're not sure whether he's about to say something brilliant or accidentally start a cult. He destabilizes the power structure just enough to remind the others that sometimes chaos is the structure. They tolerate him barely, but they also fear. What happens when they don't? And then you've got the peripheral players. Nemesis watching from the shadows, Nike whispering into Athena's ear, Tika spinning her wheel in the break room. The muses flit in and out, occasionally cerebling notes or humming passive-aggressive background music during particularly boring speeches. There are no interns. No one wants to bring mortals that close. It never ends well. Here's a quirky little story that's pure office drama. The time Poseidon and Athena fought over who should be the patron god of Athens, They both pitch gifts to the city council. Poseidon offers a salty spring not exactly practical, and Athena gives them the olive tree. The olive wins, Poseidon sulks. For centuries. That in essence is divine office politics, long memories, petty wounds, and no expiration date on a grudge. And the debates aren't just about power, they're about pride mortals. Who gets credit for a city's victory? It's what gets blamed. For its downfall? Who gets to name a star, curse a bloodline, or approve a hero's epic journey? These gods don't retire, they reposition. Every meeting, every feast, every divine intervention is a strategic move on an immortal chessboard that spans continents, generations, and at least 3 realms of existence. Scholars sometimes theorize that the dynamics between the gods reflect Greek city-states themselves, each one independent, ego-driven, occasionally allied, often at odds. The gods weren't just celestial figures, they were political mirrors. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, every Palachi saw its struggles reflected in the way the gods clashed and negotiated. Olympus, for all its glory, was basically ancient Greece with better robes and worse conflict resolution skills. In a team meeting where nobody agrees, where someone throws a tantrum, and someone else quietly solves everything, but gets 0 credit, congratulations. You've already survived a day on an Olympus. Just pray no one there decides to turn you into a tree because you didn't back their marketing idea? Let's be honest, mortals in the Greek mythology are mostly toys. Occasionally respected, sometimes blessed, but more often tossed around like dice on the gods' celestial game board. The gods don't just observe humanity, they use it, they meddle, they interfere. And when they're bored, which is often, they treat mortals like entertainment with a touch of collateral damage. If you're a human in ancient Greece and you've just had an unusually lucky day, don't celebrate too hard. Somewhere up on Olympus, someone probably just bet ambrosia on your next failure. The relationship between gods and mortals is a messy cocktail of admiration, scorn, amusement, and occasionally real affection. The gods see mortals as fascinating but flawed, noble in some ways, ridiculous in most. You're adorable, really, when you try to build temples or sacrifice goats in the perfect ceremonial pose, but cross a divine boundary, show a little too much pride, reach a little too high, and that's when things start breaking, literally like your house or your city. One of the most famous examples of divine toying is the Iliad, a war between mortals where the gods not only whose sides but actively show up on the battlefield. Like it's a fantasy football league with spears. Athena gives advice to clever Odysseus. Apollo rains down plague and arrows. Aphrodite swoops in to save Paris when he's losing a jewel and even gets injured in the process. But let's be real, it's a light scratch. Meanwhile, Zeus sits back, sometimes amused, sometimes annoyed, pretending to be neutral but frequently throwing metaphorical popcorn at the action. The Trojan War is a primo example of what happens when mortals think they're playing out their own destinies, only to realize the gods have already written the script, and it includes a lot more blood. Sometimes the divine manipulation is small-scale and personal, like when Zeus turns into a bull to seduce Europa, or a swan to charm Leader, or golden rain to get inside Dana's locked tower. Those aren't just myths, they're cautionary tales wrapped in divine soap opera. The gods play roles where disguises twist human choices, and the humans usually confused, sometimes flattered, almost always doomed. But it's not all lust and lightning bolts. Sometimes gods genuinely favor mortals. Athena mentors Odysseus not just out of strategy, but out of admiration for his cleverness. Artemis adores the hunter Orion, until, depending on the version, either a misunderstanding or Apollo's manipulation leads her to kill him. Dionysus, he once rescues a mortal woman, Ariadne, abandoned by Theseus, on an island, and not only marries her, but immortalizes her among the stars. Even Hades, her famously aloof, shows a certain dignity in how he rules over the souls of the dead, treating their passage not as sport, but as sacred duty. And then there are the half-gods, the demigods, those poor souls born of divine human unions, who walk the line between worlds. Hercules, Perseus, Helen of Troy, Achilles. They are the ultimate examples of what happens when gods and mortals bex. They get gifts. Yes, strength, beauty, charisma, but also cursed with fate's exprobables. Heroes like Achilles are born with greatness, but also an expiration date. Their lives burn bright and fast. The gods give them power and then sit back to watch. What happens when mortals try to carry the weight of divinity without the immortality to handle it? One particularly tragic example, Niobe. She had 14 children, or 12, or 6, depending on the version, and boasted that she was a better mother than Leto, who only had to Apollo and Artemis. Classic mistake. The divine twins promptly slaughter all. Her kids, an apoetic massacre of pride. Niobe, paralyzed by grief, is turned to stone, but still weeping. The message: mortals should know their place, especially when it comes to bragging. Another favorite god-mortal pastime transformation. Get too bold or too unlucky, and you might get turned into a tree, a spider, a cow, or a constellation. Eract, for instance, challenged Athena to a weaving contest and won. Unfortunately, Athena didn't like being outdone, so she shredded Eractans. Tapestry Anne transformed her into a spider to weave forever. You might call it excessive. The Greeks called it a myth. And then there are mortals who try to become gods, like Pentheus, the king, who mocks Dionys and tries to spy on his wild followers. Dionysus tricks him into dressing as a woman and sneaking into the Bacchic rites. It ends with Pentheus being torn apart by his own mother in a frenzy. Moral of the story: don't crash a divine party in drag unless you've got god-tier clearance. Quirky fact: in some rituals, mortals actually invited divine possession. Worshippers of Dionysus, for instance, would enter ecstatic states where they believed the god entered their bodies. The same goes for Apollo's oracles, especially the famous one. At Delphi, who spoke in riddles, seemingly overtaken by the god's voice, mortals didn't just fear divine influence. They sought it, even when it made them speak nonsense or shake uncontrollably, because to be touched by a god even briefly was to brush up against something more than human, something terrifying, yes, but also illuminating. Scholars still debate how seriously ancient. People took these myths, whether they believed them literally, symbolically, or somewhere in between. But there's no doubt the stories served a purpose. They made sense of randomness, explained triumphs and disasters, gave structure to the chaos of life, and they reminded people constantly that their lives were not entirely their own. Because to the gods, mortals are fascinating, fragile, and sometimes hilarious, but mostly with a medium through which they play out their own endless dramas. If we fall in love or die gloriously, or weep beneath the sky stir with the divine indifference, it's all part of the show. So if the gods ever take an interest in you, beware. Might be blessed, you might be cursed, but most likely you're just this: evening's entertainment. The thing about gods is, no matter how eternal they seem, nothing lasts forever, not even Olympus. As the centuries rolled on, something strange began to happen. The world changed, mortals changed, and the divine soap opera that had once crackled with lightning and echoed through marble temples slowly began to dim. Not with a bang, but with a long philosophical shrug. The end of the Olympian reign wasn't marked by a cosmic war or some giant monster chewing through Mount Olympus. It ended the way most dynasties do, not with defeat, but with people simply moving on. By the time the classical period gave way to the Hellenistic era, and then to Roman rule, the gods were already going through a kind of midlife crisis. People still built temples, yes, still offered sacrifices and prayed for harvests and victories. But things were shifting. The old stories were being reinterpreted, reshuffled, sometimes even mocked. Philosophers like Socrates and Plato weren't exactly Zeus fanboys. They didn't deny the gods outright, at least not in public. Ask Socrates how that worked out. But they started to question the morality of these divine figures. Is it really okay for the gods to leech it and destroy lives for fun? Should divinity reflect the best of us, or just the most powerful? Plato famously argued that if gods are truly good, they can't behave the way Homer described them. So either the poets were lying, or the gods weren't as great as people thought. This wasn't just idle speculation. It was the beginning of something bigger. The idea that the divine might be more than a person with a thunderbolt and a grudge. That maybe what we worshipped shouldn't look like us, but better than us. Meanwhile, the Romans were busy doing what Romans do best: appropriating Greek culture and rebranding it. The gods got Latin names, Roman backstories, and a fresh set of political duties: Jupiter instead of Zeus, Venus instead of Aphrodite, Mars instead of Ares, though with a little more military competence. The gods were still honored, but more like mascots than personal forces of nature. By the time of the Empire, the worship of the Olympians was already more ritual than belief, more ceremony than conviction. And then came the real game-changer, Christianity. When monotheism hit the scene, it didn't arrive quietly. The early Christian movement was radical, absolute, and allergic to pantheons. Gods with human flaws gone. Family of deities squabbling over love triangles. Not exactly the vibe of the New Testament. Instead, there was one God. All-powerful, all-knowing, no thunderbolts, throne in jealousy, no romantic shape-shifting, just one eternal being who expected obedience and offered salvation in return. At first, the Olympians were still around. People hedged their bets. Sure, I believe in Jesus, but I'll still light a candle to Athena, just in case my crops need a boost. But over time, the temples emptied. The priests faded into obscurity. Some emperors even shut the temples down on purpose. Constantine made Christianity legal. Theodosius banned pagan rituals outright.
Guy.
By the end of the 4th century CE, Olympus was more of a memory than a religion. Some temples were destroyed. Others were converted into churches. Statues were beheaded, their eyes gouged out, sometimes replaced with crosses or saintly halos. The gods weren't defeated in battle. They were dismantled by new ideas, new rules, and a new divine aesthetic. And an aesthetic that preferred humility. Over thunder forgiveness, over vengeance and faith, over feast days. But still, they didn't vanish completely. Myths don't go away, they mutate. The Olympian gods lived on in art and poetry and whispered stories. Renaissance painters revived them. Enlightenment thinkers re-examined them. And modern writers turned them into everything from comic book characters to self-help metaphors. They found new homes in novels, operas, museums, and eventually in movies. In memes. Even in their fall, they refused to be forgotten. There's a fringe theory, quirky but oddly compelling, that says the Olympians didn't disappear. They just retired. Maybe they looked at the rise of Christianity and thought, you know what? Let's clock out. Maybe Hestia went back to her hearth. Poseidon sunk into the ocean for a long nap. And Dionysus just kept partying in some dimension slightly sideways from ours. After all, immortality doesn't require relevance. The gods can be quiet without being dead. Some modern scholars even compare the decline of the Olympians to the psychological shift in how humans viewed themselves. The ancient gods, with all their flaws, reflected a world where humans were at the mercy of fate and nature. But as people gained more control through science, through empire, through philosophy, they needed their gods to evolve too. Less personal, more universal, less messy, more perfect. Still in ruins across the Mediterranean, their stories whisper in cracked columns and moss-covered altars. You can feel them. Aphrodite, brushing her hair by the sea. Athena pacing before a battle. Hermes slipping unseen between shadows. They may not answer prayers anymore, but they still echo in imagination. And ironically, in losing their temples, they gain something more permanent. Mythological immortality. No one really believes in Zeus these days, but everyone knows who he is. That's a kind of divine afterlife the newer gods don't always get. The Olympians may have fallen from religious worship, but they rose into archetypes. So maybe Olympus didn't fall. Maybe it faded. It's like the end of a play where the lights dim and the actors walk off stage. The show is over, but the characters, they linger in books and stories in the corners of your mind. When thunder rolls or a coin flip feels a little too charged or love strikes, like an arrow you never saw coming. Because gods don't die, not really. They just change form. So here we are, the last chapter. The gods have drifted from their thrones. Their temples are mostly in ruins. Nobody sacrifices goats anymore to get good weather. But if you think, the Olympians are gone. Think again. They may have lost their seats on the divine board of directors, but they've staged one of the greatest comebacks in history. Rebranded, repackaged, and reliving their glory in ways they probably never saw coming. Forget Mount Olympus. These days, the gods live in your textbooks, your TikToks, your comic books, your tattoos. Welcome to the era of cultural immortality. Start with pop culture. If you've seen a superhero movie in the last decade, odds are good that one of those flying Glowing, smirking powerhouses owes something to an Olympian. Wonder Woman's straight-up Amazonian with ties to Zeus himself. Percy Jackson's whole literary empire built on the idea that demigod teenagers still walk among us, awkwardly trying to survive high school and the occasional Minotaur. Even Thor, yes, technically Norse, has carved out his god of thunder real estate. In Hollywood's modern Olympus, often standing shoulder to shoulder with characters who could easily be Athena in combat boots or Hermes with a smartphone. The gods show up in video games too. Ever played Hades? Congratulations. You've already spent quality time with an entire dysfunctional divine. It's family tree while fighting your way through literal hell. In that world, the gods don't just give you powers, they give you commentary. Snarky, petty, charming commentary. The ancient myths may be thousands of years old, but they're still sharp enough to carry entire gaming franchises on their backs. And then there's fashion. Yes, fashion. Designers name collections after Hero and Aphrodite. Runways feature capes that scream. Zeus on a Tuesday? There are perfume ads that channel Dionysus, decadent, wild, dripping with temptation. The Olympians have become symbols not just of divinity, but of style, mood, and attitude. Want to sell a lipstick? Call it Artemis Flame. Launch a new cologne? Try Poseidon Noir. The gods have become brands which, if we're being honest, they always kind of were. Even academia can't let them go. Mythology classes still dissect their stories with surgical precision. Historians debate whether Athena was more of a warrior or a philosopher. Psychologists thank you. Freud and Jung have turned the gods into archetypes for understanding human behavior. Aphrodite is Thema. Ares is the shadow. Zeus is the overblown. Father figure with control issues. No comment. In classrooms and dissertations, the gods are more alive than ever, just less likely to throw a fireball mid-lecture. And let's not ignore the weird corners of the internet. Forums full of self-proclaimed Hellenic pagans still worship the old gods with modern flair. Think digital altars, virtual offerings, prayers typed in Discord servers. It's fringe, yes, but growing. For some people, the Olympians never stopped being real. They've just evolved to match the age. No more goat sacrifices, just candles and emojis. Honestly, the gods would probably be into it. Hermes would be a meme lord. Dionysus would run the biggest festival server. Aphrodite definitely like an influencer. She'd crash the algorithm daily. Quirky fact time. Some of the ancient statues of the gods were so iconic that even after temples were abandoned, artists in later centuries couldn't stop equating them. Roman emperors would order marble copies for their palaces. Renaissance sculptors would take the poses and rework them for saints and angels. Even in death, the Olympians were hard to shake. There's something about the human form stretched into. Divine ideal muscles to perfect gazes to confident that still hits deep. We haven't stopped chasing those aesthetics. We've just swapped the marble for Instagram filters. And there's something deeply human about this whole thing. The gods were never just about lightning bolts and eternal feasts. They were mirrors, amplified reflections of us, our ambition, our jealousy, our love, our destruction. They were complicated. And that's why they stuck. A flawless god is boring. A god who cheats, lies, loves, and weeps. That's someone we recognize. Even if they live on a mountain made of clouds, there's also comfort in them, oddly enough. In a chaotic world full of uncertainty and bad weather and existential dread, the Olympians offer something ancient and weirdly grounding. They're not here to save you, no, but they get you. They've made worse choices than you. They've loved harder, failed louder. Their stories don't promise salvation, they promise spectacle. And sometimes that's enough. Scholars still wrestle with the question, were the gods ever truly believed in the way later monotheistic religions define faith? Or were they something else? Part theater, part ritual, part social glue. Maybe the Greeks didn't believe in Zeus so much as they believed in what he represented. Authority, chaos, the unpredictability of life wrapped in a beard and a thunderbolt. And maybe that's what's happening today. We don't believe in Olympus per se, but we believe in story and archetype in the electric charge of mythology. So where are they now? The gods are hiding in plain sight in the names of planets and the branding, of sports shoes in the pages of fantasy novels and the scripts of Netflix shows. They're in your subconscious. When you crave wisdom, hello Athena. When you seek love, Aphrodite again. When you rage against unfairness, Nemesis is watching. Or win. You roll the dice and hope for luck. Tiki gives a wink. They've been dethroned, but not erased. And if they could speak, and maybe they do now and then through a crack of thunder or a sudden inspired idea, they might say, we're still here. Just call us by different names. And maybe they'd lean back, sipping something golden and glowing, amused by the fact that even after all this time, even after empire shave come and gone mortals, still can't stop telling their stories. Because myth like gods doesn't die, it evolves. So the fire is down to embers now. We've spent the whole night climbing Olympus, slipping through halls of golden gossip, diving into the egos, tantrums, alliances, and disasters that made the Greek gods feel strangely familiar, like co-workers you kind of love and deeply don't trust. They were never meant to be flawless. That's what makes them stick. That's why they followed us all this way. The Olympians weren't there to comfort you. They didn't promise eternal paradise, or that everything happened for a reason. They didn't ask for faith. They asked for respect. They wanted you to pour wine, whisper their names, and build something beautiful in their honor. And if you crossed a line, well, let's just say they weren't shy about correcting you with a lightning bolt of plague, or an extremely poetic downfall. But what they really gave us, through all the chaos, was reflection. The kind you get from a pond just before you toss a stone into it. They showed us who we were and who we could be. They told stories big enough to contain contradictions. They showed us that love can destroy, that power is fickle, that brilliance doesn't cancel out cruelty. And still, they laughed, they feasted, they fell in love, they kept going. That's the secret. Immortality isn't just about never dying. It's about always being told. And the Olympians, oh, they're being told. They're carved in statues, reimagined in comics, whispered into poems and turned into hashtags when the moment's just dramatic enough to call for a little divine flair. They're not gods we serve anymore. They're gods we remember. So here's to Athena's insight, to Dionysus's wild nights, to Artemis' independence, and to Hermes' slippery grin. Here's to Persephone's quiet strength, and here is strategic rage in her Phastus's steady hammer. To all the myths that never really ended, just shifted. Now let your eyes drift. The fan hums in the corner steady like a distant sea. The light is low, soft around the edges. Olympus is quiet for the moment. Maybe the gods are sleeping too, or watching us amused from just behind the clouds.